Chapter 2463. Inside the palace of the illusory god, a huge bronze mirror slowly appeared in front of everyone, and the scene inside was clearly seen by everyone present. In the dark and cramped cage, a figure sat alone. The surrounding light was dim. Even just looking at it, it wasn't hard to imagine how gloomy and cold that place was. However, Chu Liwei couldn't care less about this. She opened her eyes and stared at the figure in the mirror without blinking. That person wore a dark purple brocade robe and sat quietly. Even in such an inhuman environment, it still couldn't hide his noble and arrogant aura. He lowered his head slightly, emitting a cold aura, and didn't move at all. However, the moment she saw him, Chu Liu's eyes instantly heated up. It was as if something had surged into her heart at this moment and fiercely attacked it. She bit her lips tightly, and her knuckles turned white. She didn't know how much strength she used to suppress the scream that was about to burst out. It's been too long since I've seen him. Chu Liu's nails dug into her palms, and she used the sharp pain to maintain her last bit of clarity and rationality. Years had passed since they parted in the Red Moon Desert. During this time, she kept looking for their whereabouts, but she couldn't find anything. Even after guessing that they were trapped in the palace of the illusory god, she could only bide her time and wait day and night. She had imagined countless scenes of them meeting again, but she never thought that it would be in such a situation. She didn't dare to blink, and her eyes carefully scanned his body. Is he injured? Did he suffer a lot during the time he was trapped? What about Lan Xiao? He wasn't locked in the same place as him? Did he blame her for coming too late? Countless thoughts surfaced in Chu Liu's mind, and she felt suffocated. As if sensing her gaze, the Dugu Mabao finally moved. He slowly raised his head and looked over. It was a pair of clear and unpredictable purple eyes. In the dark space, it was like the only light gathered. His eyes were like an ancient well without any ripples, as if nothing could affect him at all. It was only when his gaze landed on her that some of the ice and snow in his eyes melted away, spreading a faint trace of warmth. However, this expression disappeared in an instant. Then, his gaze turned cold. "Divine Lord, are you planning to return the purple gold divine armor to me?" As his voice fell, the entire main hall of the illusory god palace fell into a deathly silence. The high priest. This was actually the high priest? He was once a top expert of the illusory god palace, unparalleled in the world. Now, how did he turn into a child? Not only were the cultivators who were attempting to ascend to the heavens deeply shocked by this scene, but even the god emissaries who were also present revealed expressions of disbelief. Fan Yunxiao and the others gasped and looked at each other subconsciously. Then, they saw the same shock and astonishment in each other's eyes. Before this, the high priest had never appeared in front of anyone. Everything about him was handled by the Divine Lord himself. Therefore, this was the first time they had seen the former high priest. This was clearly different from the rumors. Xiao Ran also stopped what he was doing and widened his eyes in shock. Priest? His impression of this person was still from 10,000 years ago, when he was still young. At that time, he only remembered the high priest wearing the purple gold divine armor and exuding an imposing aura. Although he had only seen him from afar, and a long time had passed, and his memories had become blurry. However, there was one thing he could be sure of. The former high priest was definitely not the child he was now. In fact, there were many people who had seen the high priest back then. Unlike the high and mighty emperor who could not be reached, the high priest belonged to the illusory god palace and held great power. He was in charge of many affairs for the Divine Lord. To the Divine Lord, he was both a teacher and a friend. It was the same for the second priest. The 13 god emissaries under the Divine Lord had always obeyed the Divine Lord's orders. Only the high priest and the second priest could compete with the Divine Lord. The Divine Lord had always been very respectful to these two. However, when the illusory god palace rebelled back then, countless cultivators had died with it, leaving only a few young ones. So now, most people had no impression of the high priest. Even the god emissaries were the same. But how could this be? I do have such a plan. The Divine Lord said. However, what happened back then is still vivid in my mind. The high priest betrayed the illusory god palace and caused countless cultivators to die in that chaos. You violated the contract and reforged your divine body without permission. You have committed many crimes. If I return the purple gold divine armor to you so easily, I'm afraid it will be difficult to convince the others. Dugamabao's lips curled into an extremely cold smile. If you don't want to return it, just say it. Why do you have to beat around the bush? High Priest, you are wrong. 10,000 years have passed. Everything in the past will eventually pass. For the sake of our past relationship, I am willing to take a step back. As long as you destroy your divine body, I will return the purple gold divine armor to you. From then on, we will be even. How about that? Chu Luiwe looked at the figure, asking Dugamabao to destroy his divine body. What was the difference between this and asking for his life? He, Lan Xiao, and the others had been trapped in the Red Moon Desert for 10,000 years. It was not easy for him to rebuild his divine body. If he destroyed it again, there would be no hope for him to do it again. By then, what difference would there be between him and a lonely soul? There would be no point in asking for the purple gold divine armor. This was not a negotiation at all. It was a humiliation. As expected, Dugamabao smiled mockingly as if he had heard a joke. Then he did not give any reply. He only closed his eyes gently. It was obvious that he did not want to say anything more to the Divine Lord. The atmosphere in the hall became cold and stagnant. The Divine Lord was silent for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was still emotionless as if he had already guessed his choice. The High Priest is indeed as stubborn as before. In that case, don't blame me for not taking our past relationship into account, High Priest. Hearing this, Chu Liuyue's heart skipped a beat. He had a bad feeling. The next moment, he heard the voice continue. Jun Jiuqing. With this shout, everyone's attention was instantly focused on Jun Jiuqing. Jun Jiuqing bowed. Yes, my lord. The illusory god palace does not need disloyal people. If you can ascend to the heavens and become a god, the position of the high priest will be yours. This sentence was earth-shattering, and it instantly shocked everyone present to the point that they were all stunned. They knew that Jun Jiuqing had a special identity, but they did not expect him to be the successor of the high priest that the Divine Lord had chosen long ago. Chu Luiwe frowned and looked at Jun Jiuqing. He lowered his eyes and replied respectfully. I will not disappoint the Divine Lord. Chapter 2464. Just like that, the choice of the High Priestess had been decided. Even Fan Yunxiao and the others were unable to recover from their shock for a long time. In fact, it was not that no one had discussed this issue in the past 10,000 years. The former High Priest and Second Priest had betrayed the Master God and almost destroyed the entire palace of the illusory god. Naturally, they could not continue to hold the position. After the Master God quelled the chaos, he reselected the 13 divine messengers. However, no one had taken up the position of High Priest. Everyone thought that the Master God had been betrayed and refused to choose a High Priest. Therefore, no one had publicly mentioned this matter for many years. Who knew? The Master God had just announced that the position was reserved for Jun Jiuqing. As long as he could ascend to the heavens and become a god, the position of High Priest would be within his reach. Putting everything else aside, Jun Jiuqing's talent was unquestionable. He was almost destined to succeed. In other words, he was determined to get the position of High Priest. For a moment, even the divine messengers could not help but feel a little uncomfortable. One had to know that the High Priest was more honorable than the divine messengers. Even the first divine messenger could not be compared to him. Although they knew that Jun Jiuqing had an extraordinary background and was deeply cared for by the Master God, this was still a little sudden. Chu Liuyue's brows were tightly knitted. Jun Jiuqing's expression was very calm, as if he was not surprised by this. In fact, he seemed to think that it was natural. Where did his confidence come from? As if sensing her gaze, Jun Jiuqing suddenly looked in her direction. His eyes flickered as he looked at her ambiguously. Then he quickly looked away. Chu Luiwe could not describe that feeling. In short, she felt that it was very strange. At the same time, There was another person whose emotions were fluctuating greatly, Nanjin Shu. After hearing the Master God's promise to Jun Jiuqing, his heart beat faster. Others might not know the reasons, but he knew. Back then, the earth-shattering chaos in the palace of the illusory god had lasted for a long time. Moreover, it had directly conquered the divine ruins world. It was the battle of the gods in the god-slaying mound. Countless high gods and high gods participated in that battle, resulting in countless casualties. Even after 10,000 years had passed, there was still a strong bloody aura lingering in the air. At that time, the two ancestors of the family Yi and the Nan family were deeply trusted by the Divine Master and participated in the battle together. In the end, he managed to come out alive with great difficulty. After the chaotic battle, the zither score was divided into 3 parts and scattered all over the world. The Divine Master returned to the illusory god palace to recuperate, while family Yi and the 2 ancestors of the Nan family were ordered to stay in the divine ruins world to search for the Guqin score. And this was the biggest secret of the 2 great clans. Throughout history, only the patriarchs knew about it. Nanjin Shu only found out about the past after he became the family head. Speaking of which, family Yi and the Nan family had been following the Divine Master since then. After 10,000 years of searching and waiting, he finally saw hope today. Back then, the Divine Lord had chosen those 2 because he had already made up his mind to choose them as the new priests. However, the wait lasted for many years. And now, by chance, it was Jun Jiuqing's and his turn. Nanjin Shu was extremely nervous. His throat was dry as he looked at the Divine Master with a fervent look of anticipation. Finally, the Divine Master's voice sounded again. Nanjin Shu. Yes, Divine Master. Nanjin Shu replied immediately. You are the same as him. As long as you can ascend to the heavens and become a god, the position of second priest will be yours. Understood. Nanjin Shu couldn't be more excited when he finally heard what he wanted to hear. Although the second priest was slightly inferior to the high priest, he was still better than the divine envoys. As long as he succeeded, he would be considered one of the top figures in the illusory god palace. However, after a brief moment of excitement and joy, Nanjin Shu soon became worried again. Given his current strength, it would be difficult for him to ascend to the heavens and become a god. Jun Jiuqing glanced coldly at Nanjin Shu from the corner of his eye and sneered inwardly. Originally, Nanjin Shu shouldn't be the one standing here. However, during the Battle of Peach Blossom Dock, Chu Luiyue had almost wiped out the Nan family bloodline, leaving only the mediocre Nanjin Shu to take the position. This led to today's situation. It was impossible for Nanjin Shu to succeed. He could only take a look at the position of second priest, but he couldn't reach it. However, to a divine master, this wasn't a big deal. Because the most important thing was still the high priest. Dugamabao's eyes were closed. His expression was emotionless, and there seemed to be a thin layer of frost between his brows, bringing with it a bone-chilling coldness. He didn't seem to care about the position of high priest. No matter how much the crowd probed, they couldn't see anything from his face. Chu Luiyue closed his eyes, held his breath, and forced himself to focus on the Xian formation around him. At this moment, the countless dots of light around him were almost all connected. Only a small part of it was left. Chu Luiyue's palms were sweaty. At this point, even she could not help but feel a little nervous. She had a vague premonition. Once she ascended to the heavens and became a god, it seemed like many things would start to develop in an unpredictable direction. There was a door in front of her, waiting for her to open it. Even she didn't know what was waiting for her behind the door. She held her breath and connected the last few dots of the Xian formation. Finally, as she landed on the last point, an extremely tyrannical fluctuation spread out from the Xian formation around her. Everyone turned to look at him. She's going to succeed? Chu Luiyue clenched her fists and waited quietly. However, at this moment, a star in front of her suddenly dimmed. She was stunned. Then, the countless stars and flowing lights around her sank into the darkness. A thought came to her mind. Did she fail to ascend to the heavens and become a god? Chapter 2465. Darkness. Silence. With her as the center, the stars around her all fell like meteors and were extinguished. Even the ripple from before had completely quieted down and could no longer be sensed. Chu Liwei was stunned and subconsciously raised her hand. The dimmed light spots in front of her instantly dissipated. In an instant, it was as if a gust of wind had swept over and swept everything away. A chill rose from the bottom of her heart and gradually spread, surrounding her. Chu Liu's lips moved, but she was speechless. Her mind was blank for a moment. How did this happen? Everyone in the hall was stunned when they saw this scene. After a long while, someone asked in a low voice with uncertainty, What's going on? Shangguan Yu failed? No one answered. However, everyone already had a definite answer in their hearts. She had indeed failed. That Xian formation could be said to be perfect. Logically speaking, there shouldn't be any problems. But she had failed. Even though there were many twists and turns before this, Chu Liuwen never stopped what she was doing. Her Xian formation was complete and smooth from beginning to end. Even the god envoys who didn't like her had tacitly agreed that she would succeed. After all, among all the cultivators present, she was the most outstanding one. Although the others were also considered geniuses, they were still lacking compared to her. How could she fail? It seems that without the power of the bloodline, it's indeed impossible to break through the final shackle. After a long while, Fan Yunxiao seemed to have thought of something and muttered in a low voice. After hearing his words, many people in the surroundings came back to their senses. That's right. With her extraordinary talent and strength, wasn't this the only reason why she couldn't ascend to the heavens and become a god? Without the bloodline totem, there was no bloodline power. Such a person would naturally have a harder time cultivating than others. Ascending to the heavens and becoming a god was even more impossible. This was also why the illusory god palace had always looked down on such people. When Chu Liuwei and the others came up, the attitude of Jin Yunlai and the others changed drastically just because they did not have a bloodline totem. That was not without reason. However, in the past year, Chu Liu's performance was too outstanding, so everyone gradually neglected this point. Especially after she finished walking the Star Road and deciphered all the profound formations on it, everyone had a whole new level of respect for her. She had finished the Star Path, and she had entered the palace of the illusory god openly. Then, perhaps it was not impossible for her to ascend to the heavens and become a god? Not only her, but even Qi Han and the others had the same attitude. Therefore, at this moment, everyone was very surprised. Chu Liu's eyelids drooped slightly and his brows furrowed slightly. Did he fail because he didn't have the power of his bloodline? However, she clearly had it. It was just that no one had noticed it before. She was certain that there was absolutely no problem with the Xian formation that she had used. The key lies in her. Could it really be that there was a problem with the power of his bloodline? Chu Liwei could not help but raise her hand and gently rub the space between her brows. There was no movement. In the past, the totem would always appear when she was in danger. However, this time, for some reason, there was no response at all. Chu Liwei could not do anything about the power of his bloodline in her body, because it was not under her control at all. Appearing or disappearing was never determined by her will. Therefore, even if she wanted to summon it now, it was still futile. Seeing her actions, Fan Yunxiao could not help but snort softly. Bloodline totem, there is no such thing as a bloodline totem. You should have thought of the current situation when you first entered the Heaven Gate. It was too late for regrets now. Chu Liuwei ignored him. At this moment, another fluctuation came from the side. Buzz. She turned her head to look and realized that it came from the Xian formation in front of Qi Han. He was extremely talented in this area as well. He had almost completed the Xian formation right after Chu Liuwei. Looking at the twinkling stars that surrounded him, Chu Liu's heart suddenly stopped. Qi Han also did not have the power of his bloodline. Moreover, unlike her, he really did not have it in his body. Just as this thought flashed through her mind, she heard a soft sound. Immediately after, a star in front of Qi Han also dimmed instantly. Chu Liu's heart sank. In the next moment, the twinkling stars around him dimmed as well. It was exactly the same as Chu Liyue's failure earlier. Perhaps it was because Chu Liyue had already set a precedent, but when they saw this situation again, the crowd was no longer as shocked and surprised as they were at the beginning. In fact, some people even revealed an as expected expression, as if they had already expected such an outcome. Chi Han has also failed. I remember that he doesn't have a bloodline totem either, right? Even if such a cultivator enters the illusory god palace, he will still not be able to reach the highest level. What a pity! They are indeed quite talented in this aspect. If I remember correctly, most of the people in Shangguan you do not have a bloodline totem? That little Hachi, as well as Jian Fengqi and Mu Hongyu, they are all like that. Although they are not done yet, I don't think there is much hope for them. Everyone was discussing fervently, and all kinds of voices were heard. Chi Han frowned slightly, then waved his sleeves, dispelling all the twinkling stars around him. However, the strange thing was that there did not seem to be much disappointment on his face. He looked as if he did not care about this matter at all. Or perhaps, he had already expected this outcome, so when it happened, he appeared much calmer. Chu Liyue stood beside him, taking in all the subtle changes in his expression. She had always known him very well. Therefore, she was also a little stunned. Chi Han. Hearing this, Chi Han looked over and bowed. Master, Chi Han is useless. Chu Liyue shook her head, held her forehead helplessly, and laughed bitterly. There is no need for that. After all, even I have failed. After a pause, she looked at him carefully again. You knew that you would fail? Chi Han nodded frankly. When I saw Master fail just now, I guessed it. Chu Liyue pursed her lips. No cultivator did not want to succeed in breaking through. No one would feel good if they failed just like that. Suddenly, a familiar, cold, and low voice sounded. The mystic master has failed to ascend to the heavens and become a god. Do you still want to continue? Chapter 2466. Chu Liyue turned to look at him. The person who spoke was Rong Xiu. His handsome and enchanting face was cold and calm. His question was also very normal, as if he did not feel that there was anything wrong with it. Before Chu Liyue could reply, Fan Yunxiao could not help but say, Celestial Emperor, Shanghai Yu has already failed. How can we continue? A strong force suddenly came from behind him. He was caught off guard and immediately fell forward. He staggered a few steps before he managed to stabilize himself. He turned around in shock and anger. Second in charge. What are you doing? To suddenly launch a sneak attack like this, wasn't it a little too careless? Yen Gu retracted his hand, crossed his arms, and said lazily, If the Celestial Emperor says that we can continue, then we can continue. Who are you to question him? Who are you to speak to the Celestial Emperor like that? You. Fan Yunxiao was humiliated in front of everyone. He was furious. However, he could not refute Yen Ji's words. He took a deep breath and retorted, How can you tell that I'm questioning the Celestial Emperor? I just feel that it's a little strange, that's why I asked. Why did he have to attack him so suddenly? Yen Gu sneered and looked at him from the corner of his eyes. The Celestial Emperor is the sole authority of cultivators to ascend to the heavens and enter the Pantheon record. Even the Divine Master has no right to interfere, let alone you. Do you really think you're that important just because I call you the third Divine Envoy? Fan Yunxiao's face turned pale. Yen Gu usually did not like him. No, to be precise, he was very impatient with the other Divine Envoys. However, those disputes and quarrels happened in private. It was fine if everyone tolerated each other. But now, he actually dared to mock him in front of everyone? He could not help but look in the Divine Master's direction. Second in charge is right. The Divine Master said lightly. Fan Yunxiao choked on his words. After thinking for a long time, she finally swallowed her anger and waved her sleeves. I'd like to see what other abilities she has to ascend to the heavens and break through the gods. Rong Xiu glanced at Fan Yunxiao. His eyes were extremely indifferent and cold. Whether she succeeds or not is only related to I. What's the matter? Does the third oracle wish to share Ai's burden? Fan Yunxiao's heart skipped a beat. The color on her face immediately disappeared, leaving behind a deathly pale face. If the emperor said that, then he was really angry. He hurriedly explained. Please forgive me, your majesty. I really don't have any other intentions. His voice gradually trailed off. That person's aura was too strong, to the extent that even breathing became a little difficult, and his entire body was ice cold. He was very clear that if he continued to speak, what awaited him would not be a simple reprimand. Fan Yunxiao obediently shut her mouth. When everyone saw this, they all suppressed the waves in their hearts. Whether a cultivator could ascend to the heavens and become a god was indeed only related to the emperor. After all, he was the one in control of the Pantheon record. Fan Yunxiao was purely asking for trouble. Of all the people to provoke, why did she have to cause trouble in front of the emperor? Wasn't she courting death? Chu Liuyue's hands gradually tightened in her sleeves. She took a deep breath and asked, Emperor, how do you intend to continue? Other than being a mystic master, there are 3 other paths. Rong Xiu's tone was calm, and his phoenix eyes were cold. Chu Liyue understood. So that was what he meant. Many people secretly exchanged glances when they heard this. Actually, there was nothing wrong with the emperor's method. After all, Chu Liyue was publicly acknowledged as an all-rounder. Not only was she a great grandmaster, but her performance in other aspects had always been very outstanding. It was just that when she walked the star path previously, she had left a deep impression on everyone, so they subconsciously felt that she should make such a choice. In fact, she was also a god, a doctor, and a weapon refiner at the same time. Why couldn't such a person choose? Only she would have the chance to continue. If it were someone else, even if the emperor allowed her to continue, she probably wouldn't have the strength to do so. Chu Liyue pondered for a moment. Many cultivators around also looked over, secretly guessing what choice she would make. After a moment, she said, I choose martial artist. Rong Xiu's gaze swept across her face. Permitted. Chu Liyue was about to leave. Xiao Ran, who was beside her, had a look of regret. He had always thought that Chu Liyue would definitely be the first mystic master to ascend to the heavens and become a god. He didn't expect such a situation to happen. Even with her amazing talent, she couldn't succeed. It was really a pity. Xiao Ran still felt quite uncomfortable. On one hand, he had always liked this little girl. Although she was young, she was gentle, polite, and very intelligent. She didn't bully the weak and wasn't cowardly to the strong. The attitude of the people of Illusion God Palace towards her went from disdain at the beginning to admiration later. It was almost a 180-degree change. But she didn't seem to take it to heart. She was neither servile nor overbearing and firmly proved herself step by step, using strength to speak. On the other hand, it was thanks to her that he could successfully solve the last Xian formation on the star path. Of course, he was grateful. But without the bloodline totem, Chu Liyue looked up and smiled at him. Senior Xiao Ran, don't worry. Everyone has their own fate. But you should be almost done, right? Xiao Ran's progress was only a bit slower than Chihan's. Soon it would be over. He wasn't affected by the bloodline totem. As long as everything went smoothly, he would definitely be able to enter the first volume of the Pantheon record. Xiao Ran looked at her and saw that the girl in front of him had a pure smile and clear eyes. She seemed to be unaffected by what had just happened. His heart skipped a beat, and he nodded. Thank you. If I succeed, I'll wait for you. Even though Chu Liyue failed to become a Xian master and most likely failed because of the bloodline totem, he still felt that Chu Liyue had hope. Such a person should stand at the top of a mountain and be admired by millions. Chu Liyue's smile deepened. Okay. As she spoke, she suddenly thought of something and looked at Rong Xiu. Emperor Qi Han is also a god. Can he come with me? Rong Xiu nodded. Sure. Chu Liyue raised her eyebrows and waved at Qi Han. Qi Han followed her. When they passed by Zichen, the God Master's voice suddenly came from behind. Just now, you were trying to ascend to the heavens and become a god, so I didn't disturb you. Since you're free now, return the purple gold divine armor. Chu Luiyue stopped in her tracks. Zi Chen's expression hardened. He took half a step forward and shielded Chu Luiyue behind him. The God Master seemed to chuckle. You can't possibly be thinking that a three-eyed godly eagle can truly protect this purple gold divine armor, right? Chu Luiyue patted Zi Chen's shoulder lightly and took the purple gold divine armor back. At that moment, another wail came from outside the palace. Dumpling's voice. The God Master continued. If you return the purple gold divine armor, I'll let that crimson gold celestial phoenix go. Chu Luiyue's hand suddenly tightened. Chapter 2467. Although she didn't know why the Divine Lord wanted to return the purple gold godly armor, there had to be a reason for his insistence. It was very likely that it would affect Debao's life and death. Chu Luiyue clenched the purple gold godly armor in her hand. The sharp edge of the dagger pricked her palm painfully. If she returned it, Dumpling would be saved, but Debao would be in even more danger. If she didn't return it, it would be the other way around. On one side was Dumpling, and on the other was Debao. How should she choose? Both of them were too important to her. At this moment, Dugamabao opened his eyes. He looked straight at Chu Luiyue and shook his head. Chu Luiyue's heart skipped a beat. Debao meant, have you made your choice? That deep and hoarse voice sounded again. Countless gazes swept over. Clearly, they were also very curious about what Chu Luiyue would choose. Chu Luiyue held her breath and said coldly, I won't choose either of these two choices. If you want the purple gold godly armor, come and take it yourself. If you want me to return it to you, impossible. The Divine Lord paused. So, you choose the High Priestess and give up the crimson gold sky phoenix? Chu Luiyue sneered. Divine Lord, don't you think your question is laughable? Even if I return it to you, will you really let Dumpling go? After what she had experienced, she wasn't so naive. What they wanted was Dumpling's bloodline power, and it was very likely the power after opening the 9th meridian. Otherwise, they wouldn't have done so many things for no reason, such as urging Dumpling to open her meridians. Everything they did was for a reason. At first, she didn't quite understand, but ever since Dumpling flew out of the illusory god palace, went to the sky above the holy chaos jade, and began to devour the flames on the white jade pillar, she knew their goal. The flames on the pillar were supported by the bloodline power of the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan. Previously, Xiao Ran had mentioned that the holy chaos jade was closely related to the Divine Lord, and that the flames on the white jade pillar were formed by the Divine Lord's divine power and wouldn't be extinguished for thousands of years. But in fact, that wasn't the case. She still remembered the scene when she saw Yi Zhao in the lightning pool. At that time, a lot of his bloodline power had also been sucked away. However, Chu Luiyue's mind was filled with thoughts of how to save him back then, so she didn't pay much attention to it. She just treated it as a form of torture from the illusory god palace. But now, she understood that what they wanted was the bloodline power of the Crimson Gold Celestial Phoenix clan, which was used to fuel the flames of the primal chaos holy jade. The pure bloodline power, the bloodline power. Although Yi Zhao was the clan leader, he had only opened the 7th meridian. It was probably not enough. Divine Lord, T's power, T's SS divines. She had the purest bloodline. Dumpling's importance to them was self-evident. Under these circumstances, how could they let Dumpling go so easily? Are you doubting me? The Divine Lord's voice turned cold. Chu Luiyue snorted. So what if I am? No one expected Chu Luiyue to be so stubborn. For a moment, they all fell silent. You, the Divine Master, also seemed to be a little angry. At this moment, Rong Xiu suddenly spoke. Shengguan Yu has yet to complete the Ascension to Divinity test. His voice was cold and chilly, causing others to unconsciously revere him and not dare to disobey. His meaning was clear. Everything else had to be pushed to the back. Even if the Divine Lord really wanted to take the violet gold divine armor, he would have to wait until everything was over. After a while, the Divine Lord said, As your Majesty wishes. Chu Luiyue turned and walked toward the martial artists. At this moment, She was facing the gate of the palace of the illusory god. A sorrowful and painful cry was heard again. Screech. Chu Liuyue's heart trembled. She instinctively looked up. Outside the gate, she saw what was happening. Mu Qinghe was floating in the air. A long sword flew out from his hand and charged forward. Screech. The flames that were surging toward Dumpling from the top of the white jade pillar left a crimson-gold trail in the air. This sword strike had directly cut it in half. 3 trails of fire had already been cut in half. This was the 4th. After that, the sword did not stop. Instead, it continued to fly toward Dumpling. The sword energy was awe-inspiring. In the next moment, the sharp edge of the sword sliced through Dumpling's left wing. Screech. Large patches of burnt feathers were shaved off along with their skin and flesh. The massive crimson-gold figure also trembled. The cry was hoarse and sorrowful, like a whimper. It lingered in the air for a long time. A part of Chu Liuyue's heart seemed to have been cut off. It was painful. Her chest felt like it was being pressed down by a huge rock. She could only gasp for air. However, every time she breathed, a large amount of cold air rushed into her chest. It was as if there were thorns in it, cutting through her. She clutched her heart. It was so painful that it was about to split open. She instinctively walked forward. However, the moment she lifted her foot, her legs turned to jelly. Her body fell toward the ground uncontrollably. Master. Qi Han immediately went forward to support her. Chu Luyue pressed her heart with one hand and held Qi Han's arm with the other. Her fingertips were pale. It was as if someone was holding a huge axe and crazily chopping down on her mind. Double images appeared in front of her eyes again. Countless images overlapped. It was difficult to distinguish. It was as if there were countless sorrowful cries echoing in her ears. Digression, 6 o'clock. Chapter 2468. Her lips trembled as she spat out a few muffled syllables with difficulty. That name was engraved in the deepest part of her heart, coiling between her lips and teeth, but she couldn't shout it out no matter what. It was as if a few forces were crazily pulling at her thoughts, almost tearing her apart. Qi Han's pupils constricted. He raised his eyes and looked outside the door of the main hall. The reddish-gold flames burned fiercely as if they were going to burn everything to ashes. Suddenly, Chu Liuyue's body stiffened. Then she slowly straightened up and let go of her hand. Qi Han immediately came back to his senses. Master? Her current appearance was really. Chu Liuyue lowered her eyes, her thick and long eyelashes covering the ripples in her eyes. No one knew what she was thinking at this moment. She shook her head, indicating that she was fine. Then, she half-turned and went into the martial artist's circle area. Her footsteps were very slow, as if every step exhausted all her strength. Then she turned her back. It was as if she wanted to leave the voice that broke her heart behind. Everyone's eyes were focused on her alone. The crimson-gold heavenly phoenix was in danger. Even they felt a chill in their hearts when they heard that voice, let alone Chu Luyue, who was its master. Chu Luyue slowly raised her head. Everyone was stunned. The woman's face didn't have the expected sadness and pain. Instead, it was calm. Even her starry eyes had sunk into darkness, completely silent and without any ripples. It was like an eternal night, silent and cold. Many people looked at each other. Chu Luyue. Why did she have such a reaction? She was very close to that crimson-gold heavenly phoenix. Seeing that it was being tortured like this, she was actually indifferent? Or, to her, ascending to the heavens and becoming a god was more important than everything else? But no matter what the reason was, she looked a little strange. In other words, her entire person seemed to have changed. No one spoke. It was quiet all around. Chu Luyue lifted the hem of her clothes and sat cross-legged. Her hands formed a seal in front of her and she gently closed her eyes. In the next moment, the surrounding heaven and earth energy began to surge wildly into her body. Compared to the other areas, the number of martial artists was the highest. Jun Jiuqing and Nan Jinshu were here too. Seeing Chu Luyue coming over, everyone had different expressions. Was she really so calm? Qi Han quickly caught up. When he sensed those gazes, his expression turned cold. Then he stood guard beside Chu Luiyue. Those people faintly sensed his warning and reined themselves in. At this time, it was time for him to focus on himself. Besides, based on Chu Luiyue's performance at the Mystic Master's side just now, he would probably fail again this time. There was nothing to be concerned about. Time passed slowly. Inside the main hall of the illusory god palace, it was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Zichen was looking at Chu Luiyue when he suddenly felt that his sleeves were wet. When the wind blew, it brought with it a bone-chilling coldness. He lowered his head to take a look. Red Demon was curled up in his hand, staring blankly in the direction of the door. It was expressionless, and its eyes seemed to be in a daze. Only hot tears kept falling. It was very useless, so it could only watch Dumpling suffer. At this moment, the one who brought it all this pain and suffering was its master, whom it had followed for many years. It could not help much. After all, it was not even a divine beast. Pleading, threatening, begging, it had already done everything it could. But it was still useless. Zichen looked up slightly. He stood there, his tall figure motionless. The scene outside the door was clearly reflected in his eyes. That flame seemed to be burning the bottom of his heart. His thin lips were tightly pursed, and veins were faintly bulging on his forehead. He stared straight ahead, as if he wanted to imprint everything deeply into his bones and blood. Xue Xue came to Rong Xiu's feet and whimpered. Rong Xiu's expression did not change. Xue Xue lowered its head and buried it. After an unknown period of time, at a certain moment, a buzzing sound suddenly came from the Xian formation in front of Xiao Ran. He held his breath and focused, extremely nervous. Previously, Chu Luiyue and Qi Han had failed one after another, which indeed made him worried. Hence, at this moment, he did not even dare to breathe loudly, afraid that it would affect something. Everyone turned to look at him as well. Then, there was a second buzzing sound. And the commotion this time was obviously stronger than before. Xiao Ran's throat was dry, and he did not blink. Then, countless stars gathered and condensed into a dazzling ball of light, floating quietly in front of Xiao Ran. At the same time, a totem appeared between his brows. Swoosh! That ball of light instantly entered between his brows. The next moment, Xiao Ran's aura began to rise rapidly. Rong Xiu suddenly raised his hand. A thick layer of light enveloped Xiao Ran. Almost at this moment, the Pantheon record, which was floating beside Rong Xiu, suddenly exploded with a bright light. After a moment, a name was engraved on it. Xiao Ran. While all this was happening in the main hall, the huge projection of the Pantheon record in the sky above the illusory god palace also began to produce intense energy waves. Hearing the commotion, the people waiting outside the door all became spirited and scrambled to look over. The Pantheon record is moving. Is someone finally going to ascend to the heavens and become a god? I wonder who will be the first to die? Could it be Shangguanyu? She's the one with the most potential among those people, right? I think it's possible. She even finished the star path without much effort, so it's only logical for her to ascend to the heavens and become a god. That might not be the case. Don't forget, she doesn't have a bloodline totem. In the past, there has never been such a person who successfully crossed that threshold, right? But she's different from those people. If that's the case, there hasn't been such a person who successfully entered the illusory god palace before. Didn't she do it too? Look, that person's name appeared. Someone in the crowd shouted loudly, immediately attracting everyone's attention. Everyone had a tacit understanding and looked up at the same time. On the Pantheon record, a dazzling golden name slowly appeared. Xiao Ran. When they saw these two words clearly, the noisy crowd instantly quieted down. After a while, everyone gradually reacted and looked at each other in shock. First, why is it Xiao Ran? It wasn't that Xiao Ran shouldn't appear on the Pantheon record, but that he appeared a little too early. Generally speaking, martial artists were the fastest to ascend to the heavens and become gods, followed by mystic masters or celestial physician. Artificers were the slowest. Xiao Ran was a mystic master. How could he be the first? Moreover, even if a mystic master was the first, there was still Chu Luiyue and Qi Han before him. Why didn't the names of those two appear? Chapter 2469. Is there really a problem? Someone murmured. Chu Luiyue was the main reason why Xiao Ran was able to enter the palace of the illusory god. Qi Han's performance was much better than his. But now that Xiao Ran was here, the two of them did not do anything. There was obviously a problem. Behind the crowd, Madame 11 and Madame 12 stood side by side. Naturally, they could hear the discussions of the crowd clearly. Madame 12's eyes were red. She pulled Madame 11's sleeve and sobbed. How could this be? Shouldn't Master's name be the first to appear? Dumpling is most afraid of pain. What's going on inside? But why didn't Master ascend to heaven and become a god? Why didn't Master come out to save Dumpling when she was tortured like this? Why did it have to be Mu Qinghe? There were too many questions in her heart. It was almost unbearable for Madame 12. Madame 11's face was tense. She tried her best to control her emotions. But when she heard Madame 12's words, she could not help but feel a lump in her throat. Finally, she took a deep breath and pulled Madame 12's hand away. Sister, wait here. I'll go take a look. Madame 12 was stunned. You going to the palace of the illusory god? I'll go with you. Madame 11 shook her head. The situation there is still unclear. I'm just going to explore. Don't worry and wait for me. As she spoke, she lifted her foot and walked forward. How could Madame 12 agree? She immediately grabbed Madame 12's arm. Let's go together. She had always been a soft person. She had always agreed to whatever Madame 11 said. But it was this kind of person who was the most terrifying when she was stubborn. Madame 11 frowned. After a while, she finally made up her mind. But if the situation is not right later, you have to leave immediately, okay? Madame 12 nodded vigorously. Then, the two walked forward hand in hand. But before they could go over, a figure appeared in front of them. Sixth brother? Madame 11 and Madame 12 were shocked when they saw who it was. Lu Feng looked at the two with a complicated expression. I'm here on Big Brother's orders. He said, now, no matter what happens, we can't do anything. We just have to wait. Aunt 11 suddenly raised her hand and pointed in that direction. Her voice was finally choked with sobs. But we can wait, but can Dumpling wait? If this drags on, Lu Feng closed her eyes. Not only them, but everyone in the illusory god palace was also waiting. Wait for the cultivators to ascend to the heavens and break through to godhood. Wait for the names on the pantheon record to appear. Inside the illusory god palace, the light on Xiao Ran's body gradually dissipated. With a leap, he jumped out of the ring. Everyone shuddered. Above the great Grandmaster realm, there were even venerable Xian masters. The current Xiao Ran was indeed much stronger than before. Xiao Ran clenched his fists and carefully sensed the changes in his body. He couldn't help but sigh. A supreme Xian master was indeed extraordinary. In order to cross this threshold, he had waited for too long. Just a few months ago, he was still thinking that he might not succeed this time. But the heavens didn't let him down. His entire person seemed to have been reborn, and all the movements around him were easily seen by him. He looked at Rong Xiu and cupped his fists. Thank you, Emperor. Rong Xiu's expression was indifferent. You're the one who's outstanding. The one you should thank the most is yourself. If it weren't for his years of hard work, even if the opportunity was right in front of him, he wouldn't have been able to grasp it. Xiao Ran was still very excited. He let out a long breath, then turned his gaze and looked at Chu Luiyue. Now that he had succeeded, his long-cherished wish of 10,000 years was finally fulfilled. The only thought left was for Chu Luiyue to successfully ascend to the heavens and become a heavenly god. Boom! At this moment, a shocking pressure suddenly erupted from Jun Jiuqing's body. Then, a totem gradually appeared between his eyebrows. Rong Xiu's expression was calm, as if he wasn't surprised that he would be the first to ascend to godhood. He waved his slender hand lightly, and a ray of light instantly enveloped him. Then, Jun Jiuqing's name appeared on the pantheon record. After Xiao ran, Jun Jiuqing followed closely behind. There wasn't much time between when he successfully ascended to godhood. Above the venerate gods were the supreme gods. Everyone in the hall looked over with complicated gazes. Unlike Xiao Ran, Jun Jiuqing's success was perhaps even more significant to them. This was because the moment his name was engraved on the pantheon record, he had automatically become the new high priest of the palace of the illusory god. Dugamabao suddenly opened his eyes and looked over. However, he wasn't looking at Jun Jiuqing, but Chu Luiyue, who wasn't far away. At this moment, she was still devouring the energy around her. There were even a few small energy vortexes around her. The speed at which the other venerate gods devoured energy was much slower than her. Jun Jiuqing's gaze swept past her, then he turned and left. Several gods' envoys looked over. High Priestess, congratulations. Jun Jiuqing paused. Everyone, you're too kind. Many people found it strange when they saw this. Why did Jun Jiuqing's reaction seem a little cold? He had succeeded the position of high priest. However, it was hard to guess what he was thinking, so they didn't ask too much. Nan Jinshu felt bitter when he saw this. Jun Jiuqing had succeeded, but he was still far away. Moreover, with his current condition, it would be difficult for him to succeed. The position of second high priest was probably, bam. A muffled sound was heard. Everyone looked in the direction of the sound, and their expressions became a little strange. Because Chu Luiyue had failed again. Chu Luiyue lowered her eyes and looked at her palm expressionlessly. Then, she got up without hesitation and walked toward the celestial physician. Many people looked at Rong Xiu cautiously, but when they saw that he didn't seem to have any intention of stopping her, they all quieted down. It was another long wait. While Chu Luiyue was refining pills, people around her had already succeeded in ascending to the heavens. The names on the pantheon record were gradually increasing. Of course, there were also some who failed and left regretfully. As expected, Chu Luiyue failed again when she tried to form the pill. Almost at the same time, Little Hachi's pill was also destroyed. It's impossible without the power of the bloodline. I really don't know why she's still holding on. Is she really going to give up only after the last refiner tries? She's probably unwilling to accept it. Anyone with such talent would definitely be unwilling to accept this result. Didn't you see that Little Hachi also failed? I think those without bloodline totems should be kicked out of the competition. Save them the time and energy. Little Hachi's face was filled with anger. However, at this moment, a strong medicinal fragrance suddenly came from the side. Jian Fengqi slammed his palm on the cauldron, and the pill flew into his palm instantly. The pill was formed. The Divine Doctor. Chapter 2470. This sudden turn of events caused everyone to be stunned on the spot. Jian Fengqi succeeded? But he didn't have a bloodline totem either? In the next moment, Rong Xiu waved his hand, and Jian Fengqi was instantly enveloped in flowing light. Then, his name was also engraved on the pantheon record. Looking at the name slowly appearing, the inside and outside of the palace of the illusory god fell into a strange silence. If a person without a bloodline totem could ascend to heaven and become a god, then, what was going on with Chu Luiyue? Little Hachi widened her beautiful eyes slightly and looked at Jian Fengqi with shock. You succeeded? Jian Fengqi looked at the elixir in his hand, and while he was excited, he was also full of doubts. He didn't know what was going on either. From the beginning to the end, he had done it step by step, and in the end, he had succeeded so naturally. I should ask you, didn't you succeed just now? Why did you fail in the end? Jian Fengqi asked. Little Hachi frowned slightly. How would I know? Jian Fengqi's level was even lower than hers. But in the end, she failed, and Jian Fengqi succeeded? And Master? She was the last to arrive, but she was the first to succeed, and she also failed. Little Hachi was very annoyed and couldn't help but look at Chu Luiyue, but she had already walked over to the weapon refiner with a normal expression. It seemed that she was going to try again. Seeing this, the surrounding people couldn't help but look at each other. She had already failed 3 times in a row, and she still wanted to try again? It seemed that she wouldn't give up until she hit a wall, and wouldn't give up until the end. Little Hatchie stomped her feet. She was not convinced, but she cared more about her master. Although Master looked very calm now, how could she really not care at all? If he failed this time as well? Little Hatchie lowered her head and looked at the cauldron in front of her. The flames inside had already been extinguished, leaving behind only a handful of black ashes that emitted a faint burnt smell. How could this be? She really didn't understand. There was clearly no problem in the middle. Chu Lue came to the last area for craftsmen and stood still. After that, she took out the heavenly square cauldron. Su Li and Shengguan Jing, who were standing not far away, looked over worriedly. Chu Liuyue's talent was indisputable, but she had failed the previous few times, so it was hard to say whether she would succeed this time. Now, everyone had realized that there was indeed something wrong with her. In fact, it wasn't just her. Even young Master Jian has ascended to the heavens and become a god. Why hasn't Sister 8 done anything? Outside the palace of the illusory god, Aunt 12 stared blankly at the Pantheon record that was suspended in midair, her heart filled with confusion. Aunt 11 pursed her lips. Not only 8th sister, but also master and 7th brother. Since they went in, there was still no movement. This situation was very wrong. Unfortunately, they couldn't enter now, so they could only wait outside. Lu Feng frowned and narrowed his eyes slightly. For some reason, the more he looked at the palace of the illusory god, the more familiar he felt. At first, he thought it was because of the sand table, but after a long time, he realized that it didn't seem to be the case. It seemed like he had really entered. As soon as this thought flashed through his mind, he couldn't help but rub his eyebrows and shake his head helplessly with a smile. He really thought too much. Look, someone went to the Holy Chaos Jade again. Suddenly, a shout came from the crowd. Lu Feng immediately looked over. It was a young man who looked no more than 17 or 18 years old. He was wearing a black robe and had a delicate appearance. At this moment, he hurriedly walked over and stood in front of Yu Qian. His expression was anxious as he whispered something. Someone whispered, "That's the 13th oracle? Isn't he responsible for looking after the Holy Chaos Jade? Why is he only here now? Who knows?" And from the looks of it, he didn't go over from the palace of the illusory god, but from another place. Today is such an important day. Why is he late? I don't know what he's saying to the second oracle, but his expression doesn't look good. Lu Feng was staring over there when he suddenly heard a voice from the side. Does that place need someone to look after it? He was stunned and turned his head to look. Aunt 11, what did you just say? Aunt 11 stared over there and raised her chin. It's just the Holy Chaos Jade, there's no need to look after it, right? Lu Feng only thought that she was curious and explained. I heard that the Holy Chaos Jade is very important to the palace of the illusory god, so it's normal to send an oracle to look after it. Aunt 11 sneered. It's gone, what's there to look after? Lu Feng was confused. What's gone? It's just, Aunt 11's words were about to come out of her mouth, but she suddenly stopped. Then, a trace of doubt appeared on her face and she frowned slightly. Yes, what's gone? Why would she say such a thing? Just as she was thinking about how to reply, 12th Madam suddenly whispered, Sister is right. As she spoke, she stretched out her hand and made a small gesture. It's just, missing something. Lu Feng came back to his senses. Are you talking about the missing piece in the middle of the Holy Chaos Jade? Yes. Aunt 12 nodded. Lu Feng scratched his head. This doesn't mean anything, right? Although it's missing a piece, it doesn't seem to be that important. Don't the craftsmen in the palace of the illusory god still need to borrow its power to successfully break through to become a crafting saint? But Aunt 12 hesitated and wanted to say something, but her mouth was a little clumsy and she didn't know how to explain, so she could only look at Aunt 11 for help. Aunt 11 suddenly smiled coldly. It's just scraps and you're going to so much trouble. What a joke. Lu Feng's expression gradually became strange. Scraps? Was she talking about the Holy Chaos Jade inside? As he was thinking, he saw Aunt 11 nodding with certainty. Sixth brother is right. Lu Feng was speechless. He stretched out his hand and touched Aunt Eleven's forehead. Sister 11, what's wrong with you? Wasn't she fine before? Why are you spouting nonsense now? Aunt 11 pushed his hand away, turned her head, and stared at him. After a moment, she asked softly, Sixth brother, have you entered the palace of the illusory god? The names on the pantheon record were still increasing, but those names still didn't appear. In the main hall of the palace of the illusory god, Su Li and Shangguan Jing had succeeded in ascending to the heavens and becoming gods. Chu Luiwei started later than them, so she naturally lagged behind. Her expression was calm and focused, as if there was nothing else worth her effort other than this. Time passed slowly. Nan Jinshu gradually became nervous and anxious. The others had succeeded one after another, but there was no movement on his side. At this moment, a figure suddenly appeared in his peripheral vision. He was stunned and turned his head to take a look. He didn't know when Chi Han came to his side. Chapter 2471. Nan Jinshu subconsciously felt a little nervous. He wasn't sure if it was because of the chilling aura around Chi Han or something else. However, Chi Han quickly shifted his gaze away and continued to cultivate. The surrounding energy quickly surged into his body. Nan Jinshu felt that he had overreacted. How could someone who didn't even have a bloodline totem be a threat? He quickly collected his thoughts and focused his attention back on himself. Then, he prepared to ascend to the heavens and become a god. The divine power in his body surged and gathered in his dantian. Nan Jinshu's heart beat violently. He knew that success or failure depended on this. Jun Jiuqing had ascended to the heavens and become a god. He had become the high priest. As long as he could become a god, the position of second priest would be his. Isn't the second priest coming out to take a look at such a good time? The master of gods suddenly spoke. Hearing this, many people in the hall looked in that direction. A bronze mirror appeared in front of him. Chu Luiwei paused in her actions and finally looked up. Just like Dugamabao, Lan Xiao was also trapped in a cage. It was dark, cramped, cold, and oppressive. Lan Xiao leaned against the wall with one leg bent and his elbow resting on his knee. His head was slightly lowered, and his expression couldn't be seen clearly. However, the bloodstains on his body were clearly distinguishable. The bloodstains were dark red and seemed to be left behind from the previous injury. Chu Liuyue's heart tightened. This proved that Lan Xiao had been staying here ever since that time and hadn't even changed his clothes. He had always been very concerned about his appearance. However, his clothes were tattered and dirty now. To him, this was perhaps more humiliating and embarrassing than any other punishment he had ever received. At this moment, Lan Xiao looked over. His gaze first swept past Chu Luiwei and paused for a moment. His handsome face softened a little, but there were ripples in the depths of his eyes. Chu Luiwei pursed his lips slightly. Then, Lan Xiao turned to look at Nan Jinshu. His expression once again became indolent, devilish, and indifferent. You call me out just to look at this? His words were filled with disdain. Nan Jinshu felt as if he had been slapped in the face. Compared to Jun Jiuqing just now, this situation was even more unbearable. He took a deep breath, gathered all of his divine power, and slammed it into the origin core in his dantian. The more the other party looked down on him, the more he wanted to prove to them he was definitely not bad. Boom! A shocking fluctuation spread out from his body. Indistinctly, Nan Jinshu felt as if he had touched an invisible barrier. He was overjoyed. Just as he was about to continue, he suddenly realized that he was unable to gather the energy around him. He turned around in shock, only to realize that all these powers had been forcefully snatched away by Chi Han. The two of them were very close to each other. Chi Han's actions naturally had the greatest impact on him. It was only a momentary pause, but the divine power in his body suddenly went out of control and crazily scattered toward his limbs and bones. Crash! Nan Jinshu could clearly hear the sound of his divine power collapsing. He was shocked, but before he could react, he felt his chest tighten. Pfft. He spat out a mouthful of blood and fell to the ground with a pale face. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. At first, everyone was still waiting to see Nanjinshu ascend to the heavens and become a god. Unexpectedly, not only did he fail, but he also got into trouble. Rong Xiu's expression did not change. Umo, who was beside him, hurriedly went forward and dragged the unconscious Nanjinshu out. Seeing this, someone finally could not help but ask. Celestial Emperor, Qi Han purposely made a move just now and caused Nanjinshu to fail in becoming a god. Shouldn't he be severely punished? As soon as this was said, the hall fell into dead silence. Everyone present was smart and could more or less see something. Qi Han clearly did it on purpose. Rong Xiu's eyes were cold. Nanjinshu's abilities are weak. He's not qualified to enter the Pantheon record. As soon as this was said, everyone was speechless. Lan Shao suddenly chuckled. You're right, Celestial Emperor. If he's strong enough, why can't he deal with such a small commotion? Speaking of which, Qi Han was just focused on cultivating. He didn't do it on purpose. Don't tell me that Nanjinshu can't ascend to the heavens and become a god because someone else is too strong? He leaned his head against the wall lazily. This is the second priest that you chose? But he's really too weak. This was obviously directed at the Master God. Many people held their breaths. However, just as they thought that the Divine Master would be enraged, they suddenly heard a faint laugh. Of course he can't be compared to you. Unfortunately, you've already betrayed the palace of the illusory god. Lan Shao closed his eyes as if he was too lazy to argue with him. Chu Luiwei retracted his gaze. There's nothing left? Yu Qian frowned. Have you searched everywhere? Is there really nothing left? The 13th oracle, Sang Bai, looked helpless. Second oracle, I've searched everywhere. Indeed. You know that it takes a lot of energy to keep the flame burning for a long period of time. The little stock from before has been used up. What about Yi Zhao? He's also used up the bloodline power in his body. How is that possible? Yu Qian's expression turned cold. He's the clan leader. Even if the bloodline power is not as pure as before, it's impossible for it to be completely gone. At this point, he lifted his foot and walked forward. I'll go take a look at the lightning pool personally. Chapter 2472. Sang Bai looked nervously at the sky. There were a total of 13 white jade pillars around the chaos holy jade. Dumpling flew into the sky and began to devour the flames at the top of the 13 white jade pillars. In other words, she was devouring the bloodline power of the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan. Now, Mu Qinghe had already cut off 8 of the flames. For this, Dumpling had also paid a huge price. Her body was already riddled with wounds and badly mutilated. However, she did not move. She remained in place and did her best to plunder the power of the flames. There were already several balls of flames that were as weak as candles in the wind, as if they would be extinguished at any moment. Sang Bai had been in charge of this for many years and knew this the best. Judging from the current situation, she would not be able to hold on for long. He gritted his teeth and quickly followed the Yu Qian. The Yu Qian sped all the way to the lightning pool. Shijing was standing on a reef by the shore, looking into the distance. Hearing the commotion, he subconsciously looked up. Seeing that the Yu Qian and Sang Bai were rapidly approaching, he moved and hid behind a huge rock. The two of them did not notice Shijing's existence. Arriving above the lightning pool, the Yu Qian looked down. In the huge lightning pool, countless Tianlei were frozen and motionless. He said, "Wait here. I'll go down and take a look myself." Sang Bai nodded, "Yes." With that, the Yu Qian did not hesitate and went straight down. He was the one who cast the formation that sealed the lightning pool, so it was naturally more convenient for him to enter and exit. He rushed into the lightning pool and was quickly submerged. The Yu Qian knew quite a bit about the lightning pool, so it did not take much effort for him to reach the deepest part. A ball of golden Tianlei was wrapped around it, flickering with a bright light. Even without moving, one could still feel the strong pressure from it. The Yu Qian approached it. A black chain suddenly flew out from inside. He grabbed the chain and looked at it carefully. Then, his expression turned serious. There was indeed no longer any crimson gold sky phoenix bloodline power on it. It shouldn't be, Yu Qian couldn't help but murmur. Yi Zhao was the patriarch and was different from the other crimson gold heavenly phoenixes. As long as he was still alive, he would be able to continuously produce bloodline power to sustain himself. Impossible. Suddenly he was shocked. A preposterous thought flashed across his mind at lightning speed. Next, he took out an ancestor's golden feather and swept it across the black chain. There was no reaction. In an instant, Yu Qian's hair stood on end. The person inside wasn't Yi Zhao. Mu Qinghe's sword slashed down again. The 12th line of fire was also forcefully severed. One of Tuan Zi's feet was chopped off along with it. A wail could be heard. Compared to the initial situation, her voice was now much hoarse and weak. It was obvious that she was an arrow at the end of its flight. His bones had already been shattered, and his flesh had been cut apart. Only half of his bloody flesh remained. It was a shocking sight. The blazing flames swept over, and the wound was charred and curled up. Ant 12 covered her mouth, and a low whimper came from her throat. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Ant 11's eyes were red. Her whole body seemed to be nailed to the ground as she stared unblinkingly at the scene. Lu Feng wanted to cover the eyes of the two girls, but was stubbornly pushed away by Ant 11. She gritted her teeth and asked in a choked voice, "Do we still have to wait?" Lu Feng clenched his fists. He was about to speak when he suddenly felt the sky darken. A gust of strong wind swept over with that terrifying heat wave. Lu Feng was shocked and looked up abruptly. A cry of surprise came from the crowd. The divine fire has been extinguished. In the palace of the illusory god, the white jade pillars stood quietly. Just like that, the flame burning at the top of one of them was suddenly extinguished. After a short silence, the crowd was in an uproar. The divine fire of the chaos holy jade burned for thousands of years without extinguishing. Now, how could it? And because of the extinguishing of this divine fire, the sky darkened. Mu Qinghe glanced at it and frowned. Then, his sword flew out at an even faster speed. The last divine fire was intercepted. At the same time, Dumpling's other leg was also cut off. Her wings were already broken, and her body was covered in wounds. Under the impact of this force, she finally could not hold on and fell heavily to the ground. Bang! A huge muffled sound was heard. Her body, which was full of wounds and bloodstains, fell heavily on the chaos holy jade. Bang! A miserable cry resounded through the heavens and the earth. In the next moment, the golden flames around her body rose even more fiercely. Her whole body was completely burning. Mu Qinghe's expression changed. However, it was too late. The flame at the top of the second white jade pillar was extinguished. Then the third pillar. The fourth pillar. As the flames on the chaos holy jade were extinguished, the sky quickly darkened. The gust of wind carried heat waves and rushed in all directions. It was as if it wanted to burn this entire world to the ground. Such a shocking movement attracted the attention of everyone in the main hall. What's happening outside? The divine fire of the chaos holy jade is extinguished. What? The door was wide open. Everyone here, as long as they turned their heads, could clearly see what was happening outside. After a short moment of noise, the huge palace of the illusory god fell into a dead silence. That was an illusion created by the divine master's own strength. How could it suddenly be extinguished? Except for the divine envoys, the rest of the people had a complicated expression. No one spoke. Little Hachi and the others were trembling in their hearts. They unconsciously looked at Chu Luiyue. Her back was facing the door, and her shoulders were straight. A few strands of hair fell from her forehead, covering the emotions in her eyes. At this moment, a fine silver tianlei's power passed through her hand. She suddenly trembled violently as if she had been scalded. Then, the divine artifact that she was refining was also greatly affected and broke from the middle. So far, she had tried all 4 methods. Without exception, all of them failed. She gently closed her eyes. Inside the main hall, the lights were bright. Outside the main hall, the sky gradually darkened. A wind swept in from outside. With a scorching temperature, it was like a surging river, vast and mighty, swallowing everything. The flame and wind tightly wrapped around her, and she almost couldn't breathe. Finally, the last ball of flame on the white jade pillar was extinguished. The sky was completely dark. Only the golden flame on the chaos holy jade was still burning brightly, almost lighting up half the sky. Chu Luiyue suddenly opened her eyes. In an instant, stars seemed to be extinguished in the depths of her eyes. The next moment, she turned around and walked outside. She brushed past Rong Xiu without looking back. Fan Yunxiao and the others were about to stop her, but Rong Xiu suddenly raised his hand. A golden barrier fell from the sky. It surrounded the entire illusory god palace. Chu Luiyue walked outside alone. The sky outside was already really dark. She raised her head and took a look. Then, her gaze fell on Mu Qinghe, who was not far away. Sensing her gaze, Mu Qinghe's body instantly tensed up. Chu Luiyue's lips slightly raised into an extremely faint smile, but there was no smile in the corners of her eyes. Mu Qinghe's hand that was holding the sword gradually sweated. However, she didn't say anything and just continued to walk forward. She arrived in front of the chaos holy jade. The golden flame burned fiercely. It was the only light here. Without hesitation, she stepped into the ball of flame. A small figure was curled up in it. Her body was full of charred and festering wounds. Her hair was scattered, and only large patches of charred black remained on her rich and beautiful lotus leaf dress. Chu Luiyue bent down and carefully picked her up. Her hand touched the layers of ashes for a while. There were 2 burnt red ropes tied to golden bells. The delicate and small golden bells on them had also been twisted and deformed. She gently put them away and helped the little person in her arms tidy up her hair. Then she looked at her feet. His originally white and bare feet were almost chopped off at this moment, swaying gently as they dangled on the ground. The wound was charred black, and the bloodstains had almost been burned dry. She could vaguely see the eerie white bones. She hugged her even tighter and gently rubbed her little feet. "Our dumpling is the most obedient." She whispered and kissed the forehead of the little person in her arms. "Dumpling, come home with me." Chapter 2473. Her voice was very soft, as if she was afraid of disturbing the little person in her arms. The little thing that had always been soft and delicate didn't respond. Her face was covered in dust and dirty blood. Her eyes were tightly closed, and there was a greenish-black death aura between her brows. It was hard to imagine what a pair of beautiful and lively grape-like big eyes it used to be. But now, she was quietly lying in her arms, and her small body gradually became cold. That coldness almost spread from her skin to Chu Luiyue's limbs and bones. She was clearly surrounded by a sea of fire, but she felt extremely cold. The scarlet golden tongues of fire leaped up and reflected in her cold and focused eyes. It was as if there were flames surging under the frozen sea. Ice and fire intertwined, and it was an indescribable pain. When the pain reached the extreme, it was numbness. Chu Luiyue lowered her head and put her forehead on her small forehead and closed her eyes. A teardrop silently slid down from the corner of her eyes. It flickered with a fragmented luster, bright and cold. The wind whistled past her ears, but her heart was incomparably empty and cold. After a long time, she finally raised her head, turned around, and looked towards the main hall of the illusory god palace. Under the gloomy sky, everything was a blur. Only the towering, sacred, and noble hall was silent and lofty. It was as if it had been silent for tens of thousands of years. The Pantheon record floating above the main hall shone brightly. On it, a large number of names were hidden under the light. Those were the names of people who had already broken through to the heavens. Hidden under the light, hidden by the passage of time. Only a few names could be clearly seen. Xiao Ran, Jun Jiuqing, Jian Fengqi. Those were the traces left behind by the people who had just broken through to the heavens. Chu Luiyue stared at it, and there seemed to be waves surging in the depths of her eyes. She seemed to be looking at the Pantheon record, but also seemed to be looking at something else through the Pantheon record. At this time, the last person in the main hall of the illusory god palace had finally finished the test of breaking through to the heavens. Rong Xiu raised his hand and clenched the air. The 4 rings instantly dissipated. Then he heard Rong Xiu's deep and cold voice. The test of ascending the heavens and breaking through the gods is over. This voice came from the illusory god temple. It was as if a saint was passing judgment, and it clearly entered everyone's ears. Everyone was shocked and suddenly came back to their senses. Is it over? That's it? Over? However, this was completely different from what he had expected. Chu Luiwei and the others were a complete surprise. None of them succeeded in ascending to the heavens and breaking through to godhood. But that was not the most important thing. The divine flame of the primal chaos holy jade was extinguished. There was also the crimson gold heavenly phoenix that burned itself to death. Why was the divine fire extinguished because of her? Such a thing had never happened before. Thus, at this moment, everyone fell into silence as they looked at the lonely white jade pillar under the dark sky. No one knew what would happen next. The illusory god palace was also deathly silent. After a long while, Xiao Ran finally could not help but murmur, How is this possible? He had always felt that Chu Luiwei would have no problem ascending to the heavens and becoming a god. She was so outstanding. Even though he had witnessed her failure with his own eyes, he still had an inexplicable belief in his heart. She would definitely succeed. But now, everything was over. However, she did not succeed in ascending to the first volume of the Myriad Gods record. What's so strange about that? I can only say that she's not fated to succeed. Fan Yunxiao snorted coldly. Even Jian Fengqi succeeded, but she did not. Who could she blame? In the end, she should not have harbored such expectations from the beginning. And that Qi Han and Little Hachi did not succeed either, right? Such a person does not have the right to enter the illusory god palace. As soon as he finished speaking, Fan Yunxiao suddenly felt as if an extremely cold gaze had landed on him. He subconsciously looked over and happened to meet Qi Han's icy gaze. For some reason, he suddenly shivered. But soon he realized that there was something wrong with him. The other party was just a lowly existence that failed to break through to godhood. Why did he feel that he was dangerous? This made Fan Yunxiao a little angry. Just as he was about to say something, a fierce shout suddenly came from outside. Divine Master! There's something wrong with this Shangguan Yu. The one who shouted this was Yu Qian. After sensing that something was wrong with the lightning pool, he knew that something was wrong and immediately rushed back as fast as he could. Before he arrived, he had already seen the divine fire of the chaos holy jade extinguish one after another. This confirmed his thoughts. He did not even have time to bring Sang by and quickly rushed back. At this moment, both inside and outside the illusory god palace were dead silent. Therefore, his voice was clearly heard by almost everyone. Countless pairs of eyes looked at him. Everyone had different expressions. Something was wrong? What did this mean? The second divine envoy had always been calm and composed outside. Why now? Before they could figure it out, Yu Qian had already arrived at the steps of the illusory god palace's main hall. He quickly walked into the main hall and cupped his fists. Divine Master! The person trapped under the lightning pool is no longer Yi Zhao. It's Yi Gong. As soon as he said this, everyone was in an uproar. Previously, there had been such a disturbance in the lightning pool. Everyone knew that the clan leader of the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan, Yi Zhao, was trapped under the lightning pool. In fact, to prevent him from escaping again, the second divine envoy and the others had even sealed the entire lightning pool. But now, he actually said that the person below had been changed? Very quickly, someone reacted and looked at Chu Luiwei. She was clearly there when the riot broke out. The young clan leader of the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan was her contracted divine beast. Naturally, it was reasonable that she would go and save Yi Zhao. If this matter was not done by her, who else could it be? Yu Qian was about to go crazy. The blow to him was simply too great. He thought that the matter had been resolved. He thought that Yi Zhao was still trapped under the lightning pool. He thought that he had been threatening Dumpling with Yi Zhao's life for such a long time, but who knew that they had already stolen the sky and swapped the sun. Everything in the past had become a joke when he thought about it now. That Sheng Guanyu is arrogant and impudent. How dare he do such a thing in the illusory god palace? He deserves to die. Yu Qian hated Chu Luiwei to the core now. Only Dumpling died. How could it be enough? She herself should also suffer the pain of being cut into pieces and be tortured to death. Yu Qian is willing to take Sheng Guanyu's life personally. Before the Divine Master could reply, Yu Qian suddenly heard a chuckle coming from outside the hall. That voice came with the wind. It was light and ethereal, but it seemed to contain the might of thunder and lightning. It inexplicably made people feel reverence. Yu Qian's heart skipped a beat, and he subconsciously turned around to look. He saw a woman in a red dress standing in the red and golden flames. Her lips were slightly curved and her eyes were cold. Chapter 2474. It was Chu Luiwei. However, there was something inexplicably different about her. She didn't look the same as before. Although her appearance and figure hadn't changed much, it felt as if this woman had become a different person in the blink of an eye. Yu Qian's heart trembled slightly. In an instant, the sharp voice that rushed to his throat was choked, and he couldn't say anything. Rong Xiu stood with his hands behind his back and looked into the distance. His phoenix-like eyes were as deep and unfathomable as the sea. Zichen. Chu Luiwei suddenly spoke. Zichen answered and came over. Chu Luiwei handed over the little girl in her arms. Help me take good care of Dumpling first. When she mentioned Dumpling, her voice became a little softer. Zichen looked down and his pupils instantly shrank. In his impression, Dumpling had always been lively and quick-witted. She always dressed herself up beautifully, was smart, soft and cute, and was best at acting coquettishly. Unlike now, she was covered in blood and dust. Her whole body was covered in scars, and there was almost no unscathed spot on her. He stretched out his hands stiffly and held the little ball in his arms. The moment he touched it, his fingertips trembled slightly. The softness and sweetness in his memory was only left with a bone-chilling coldness. She must be very cold. Zichen pursed his lips tightly. His wide and warm hands carefully held the two small feet and wrapped them in his palms. It was as if this could warm up her cold body. Hong Yao flew out of Zichen's hands and pounced on Dumpling's chest, whimpering softly. If it could, it was willing to take her place. Wasn't it just a life? It would give it to her. Hong Yao cried and clenched Dumpling's skirt tightly with its claws. Soon it was wet. The smell of blood in the air seemed to be thicker. Chu Luiwei retracted her gaze. When she looked forward again, the trace of warmth and tenderness quietly disappeared. It was as if frost had fallen and froze everything. Her eyes were so cold, solemn, and disdainful, like a glacier that would never melt, or like the dark night, untouchable. She said, I did take Yi Zhao out of the thunder pool. As soon as these words came out, the crowd was in an uproar. Although he had already guessed it before, hearing her admit it still gave him quite a shock. She was too bold. How dare she swap Yi Zhao under the eyes of the Divine Master and the Divine Envoys? More importantly, how did she do it? Countless thoughts circled in the crowd's hearts, causing them to look at Chu Luiwei with even more complicated gazes. Yu Qian was also shocked by Chu Luiwei's frankness. But he soon used ants of the eye. She had to admit it. At this point, there was the eye Luiwei's have evidence. You, S of Savu. Chu Luiwei smiled faintly as if she had heard a joke. At this moment, Jinyun Lai, who was in the main hall, suddenly sensed that something was wrong. She frowned. Why hasn't the Pantheon record been put away? His voice was not loud, but at this time, it was very quiet, so the people around him could hear him clearly. At first, no one noticed it, but after hearing his words, they suddenly realized that it was a little strange. Since it's over, the Pantheon record should be put away automatically. But why is it still hanging there? Mu Dongyu was standing beside him. Hearing this, she subconsciously looked around. It's indeed over. Didn't the Emperor put away the bracelet? But the Pantheon record. Many people looked at Rong Xiu, only to see that his handsome and noble face was still cold. It seemed that he had no intention of making a move. What is the emperor waiting for? Jin Yunlai could not help but ask in a low voice. At the same time, the people outside the gate of the illusory god palace also sensed that something was wrong. It had been a while, but the Pantheon record was still hanging quietly above the main hall. The brilliant light was so bright that it was almost impossible to look directly at it. What's going on with the Pantheon record? Is there someone who wants to continue ascending to the heavens? But didn't the emperor just say that it's over? This has never happened before. Could it be that the flame on the Chaos Holy Jade has been extinguished? That's impossible. The emperor is in charge of the Pantheon record, and the Chaos Holy Jade belongs to the illusory god palace. The two have nothing to do with each other. All sorts of discussions could be heard from all directions. Yu Qian also heard it. He frowned and glanced at the Pantheon record. Although he also felt a little strange, he did not care too much. What he was most anxious about now was to kill Chu Luyue immediately. At this moment, Chu Luyue spoke. She asked faintly, "Yu Qian, you want to kill me?" Yu Qian frowned. Of course. Chu Luyue's smile deepened. Unfortunately, you are not qualified. Yu Qian was stunned. Not qualified? Not qualified to kill her? What did that mean? Just as he was puzzled, he saw Chu Luyue's gaze sweep past him and look at the innermost part of the main hall, the Divine Master. It was just a glance. Everyone in the hall also saw the look in her eyes at this moment, and they were all stunned. That gaze was really, however, in the next moment, Chu Luyue gently closed her eyes. The reddish-gold flame burned brightly behind her, and the wind swept up her dress, making it flutter. Her fine black hair fluttered in the wind like fluttering butterflies. A shocking pressure suddenly erupted from her body. Endless energy of heaven and earth began to crazily rush into her body. A brilliant light appeared between her eyebrows. That was Bloodline Totem? No one knew who it was, but someone suddenly cried out in alarm. Chu Luyue has a bloodline totem? She has the power of a bloodline? Chapter 2475. This voice seemed to come from the boundless sky. It was light and heavy, carrying endless pressure as it descended. At this moment, the entire illusory god palace was silent. Only her voice could be heard. Every living thing was shocked. It was an interrogation, and a supreme honor that had finally returned. Countless pairs of eyes stared blankly at the woman in red standing in the flames. It was a slender and exquisite figure, but it contained shocking power and pressure that made people not dare to look directly at her. At the same time, a question appeared in everyone's mind. What exactly did she mean by that? The position of the Divine Master. Who was she asking about? Who was she? At the same time, the illusory god palace was also in dead silence. Duga Mabao suddenly opened his eyes and looked ahead. Lan Shao also flipped over and stood up. He stared fixedly at that figure, and there seemed to be something surging in his eyes. All the god envoys were stunned. Chu Liyue's question was about the Divine Master. Someone couldn't help but turn around and look at the figure in the deepest part of the illusory god palace. After a moment, that low and hoarse voice finally sounded. This seat was originally mine. How can it be enough? Really? Chu Liyue's lips curled up slightly. Her eyes were like obsidian, cold and heavy. Silence reigned all around. She suddenly raised her eyes and looked at the Pantheon record floating above the main palace. The totem between her eyebrows became clearer and brighter. Then she said, "The 8th god envoy." Everyone was stunned. Why did she call out to Shu Jing at this time? Shu Jing, who was lying on the ground in front of the illusory god palace and dying, was also shocked when she heard that. She instinctively looked up. However, Chu Liyue's eyes weren't looking at her. Boom! A bright golden light suddenly exploded on the Pantheon record. Instantly, it was as if fireworks had been set off. In the next moment, a name was clearly reflected in everyone's eyes. It was as if the fog had finally been pushed aside. That layer of blurry boundary suddenly disappeared along with her chant. It was like a god's order, like a summon. Little Hatchie. Everyone widened their eyes in horror and looked at the name that suddenly appeared on the Pantheon record in disbelief. Little Hatchie? She had clearly failed in her attempt to ascend to the heavens and break through to the divinity realm. Her name had long existed in the Pantheon record. At the same time, little Hatchie, who was in the main hall, suddenly regained her senses. It was as if a thin layer of ice had been shattered in an instant, as endless waves surged out from within. A brilliant light emerged from between her brows. That was also a bloodline totem. Upon seeing this scene, Fan Yunxiao and the others were all shocked. Little Hatchie actually had the power of a bloodline? Then, Lil 8 blinked her beautiful eyes and her body moved, disappearing on the spot. In the blink of an eye, she arrived in front of Chu Luiyue. A smile appeared on her bright and charming face. Little Hatchie, please forgive me for coming late. Her appearance was clearly the same as before, but her enchanting charm was even more flourishing than before. Just by standing there, she could easily steal everyone's line of sight. She was like a rose blooming in the best season, with a strong fragrance. Everyone took a while to react before they realized what had happened. The 8th divine envoy that Chu Luiyue had called out was her? As if to verify their guesses, Chu Luiyue said indifferently, Herb Mountain hasn't been properly taken care of for a long time. Little Hatchie's eyes curved into crescents. I'll go now. As she spoke, her feet moved, bringing a gust of fragrant wind with her as she headed straight for Herb Mountain. Shu Jing was suddenly alarmed. What were they planning to do? Little Hatchie suddenly stopped and looked back. I almost forgot that there was still you. She blinked her beautiful eyes. Then, with a gentle wave of her fair and soft hand, the broken jade beads on her wrist jingled. Shu Jing's figure flew up uncontrollably. Little Hatchie was very fast. In a few breaths' time, she had already arrived at Herb Mountain. Then, with a thought, Shu Jing's body seemed to be ruthlessly thrown out by an invisible force. She landed heavily on a mountain peak. Then, she rolled down from the top and fell into the stream below with a plop. Shu Jing's face turned even paler. She suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. Little Hatchie stood in the air with her arms crossed. She tilted her head and sized her up. Then, she snorted softly. Look at what you've done to my medicinal mountain. Look at what you've ruined. Hearing this, Shu Jing's mind was shaken. This herb mountain clearly belonged to her. When did it become Little Hatchie's? She raised her head with difficulty. Her eyes were full of resentment. Little Hatchie's gaze shifted slightly. She seemed to have seen something. Her red lips curled up and she smiled. Big brother knows me the best. Shu Jing subconsciously followed her line of sight, but was suddenly stunned. Not far away, that faintly green barrier had appeared at some point. Moreover, it was different from its appearance in the past, which was always faintly discernible. This time, it had completely appeared. This barrier seemed to have fallen from the sky. Countless streams of light flickered on it. It was clear and magnificent. Accompanying it was a tyrannical aura that could not be ignored. With that, Little Hatchie waved her hand. A gust of wind seemed to blow past, stirring the barrier. In the next moment, the barrier suddenly dissipated. It transformed into countless streams of light that scattered over the entire Herb Mountain. Chapter 2476. Herb Mountain had always been under the control of the 8th Divine Envoy. Everyone silently agreed that it was Shu Jing's territory. But now, she was being crushed in all aspects on Herb Mountain. This scene shocked countless people, and they were unable to recover from their shock for a long time. How could this be? Herb Mountain is different from before? This is Herb Mountain's original appearance. But 10,000 years have passed, and there are not many people left who have seen Herb Mountain in the past. That's why no one brought it up. Thinking about it, the 8th? No, Shu Jing has been in charge of Herb Mountain for so many years, but she hasn't done anything. Anyway, this is the first time I've seen such a vibrant Herb Mountain. That Little Hatchie, I'm afraid, all kinds of discussions were going on. In fact, at this time, who wouldn't have guessed that little 8 was the 8th divine emissary? But, if she was the 8th divine envoy, then what was going on with Xu Jing, the 7th divine envoy? Chu Luiyue spoke again. In the main hall, Jin Yunlai's heart suddenly trembled. Almost instantly he understood that Chu Luiyue wasn't calling him, but, bam! On the Myriad God Road, right next to little Hachi's name, another golden firework bloomed. Chi Han's name suddenly appeared. Everyone instinctively looked at Chi Han and saw that the same totem had appeared between his eyebrows. He moved his feet. In the distance, the star road outside the door suddenly exploded with thousands of rays of light. Under the dark sky, countless Xian formations condensed into dots of light, flickering and spreading out like a river of stars. At this moment, the entire illusory god palace seemed to be lit up. Jin Yunlai's face was pale. Even he couldn't control all the Xian formations on the star road so easily. However, to Chi Han, this seemed to be a piece of cake. Chu Luiyue lifted her chin slightly and continued asking, "Is this star road yours?" Her voice was light like the wind, yet it carried an extremely strong pressure. Every single word she spoke was like a thunderclap that exploded in everyone's hearts. Everyone was stunned by what was happening in front of them. If there were still some people who were skeptical about the Herb Mountain before, then now, there was no way to refute it. Chi Han was the 7th divine emissary. However, Chu Luiyue did not stop. She suddenly raised her hand and swept her gaze across it. There was a faint red mark on the back of his hand. Just now, in the main hall, when she was trying to forge a weapon to break through the spirit, her hand was scalded by a tiny wisp of Tianlei power because she was distracted for a moment. Actually, that bit of pain was nothing to her. However, it was very painful. Even though the scars were about to fade, she could still clearly remember the intense pain she had felt at that moment. "I just don't know if it's my hand that's hurting or something else." She smiled and raised her hand. Her slender and soft fingers were as tender as spring onions, yet they were also like fine porcelain jade, captivating one's mind. Then she lightly tapped the air with her finger. Boom! A loud explosion took place all of a sudden. However, this sound actually came from the lightning pool. Oh no! Mu Dongyu suddenly realized something and quickly rushed out. Her body was like a sharp sword, cutting through the air and heading straight for the lightning pool. However, it was already too late. A burly figure had unknowingly arrived above the lightning pool. At this moment, he was raising the hammer in his hand high up and smashing it towards the huge lightning pool. A totem flashed between his eyebrows. As he moved, his muscles almost burst out of his clothes. This hammer carried the force of thousands of kilograms as it landed heavily. The dull sound of the impact seemed to have smashed into everyone's hearts. Then, there was the sound of something shattering. Mu Dongyu was shocked. The ceiling array above the lightning pool was actually smashed open by this hammer. Below, countless silvery delay broke free from its restraints and began to swim wildly. Mu Dongyu felt a strong sense of uneasiness in her heart. A long spear suddenly appeared in his palm. He didn't even think before he attacked. An extremely sharp sound of air being torn apart was heard. An astonishing force rapidly approached and arrived in the blink of an eye. However, Shijing did not seem to be worried. He did not even turn his head. Seeing that the long spear was about to pierce through his chest, he finally moved. He raised the hammer in his hand and swung it fiercely. Clang! The long spear collided with the hammer just like that. After a crisp sound, the long spear was flung out. Whoosh! Thud! The long spear was forcefully swept down by Shijing and pierced into the lightning pool that had yet to be completely unsealed. A few fine patterns spread out in all directions with the long spear as the center. The array was gradually unsealed. More and more Tianlei surged up one after another. From afar, it looked like a monstrous wave. Mu Dongyu's chest tightened and she was stunned for a moment. He had guarded the lightning pool for 10,000 years and had always felt that he knew every inch of space and every Tianlei power here very well. But only now did he realize that he was ridiculously wrong. Hee, the treasure that I hid below back then has not been discovered by you. Shijing laughed. His tiger-like eyes burned with a burning desire to fight. Then he swung his hammer again. Splash! With one strike, the entire lightning pool also surged. A flash of golden light suddenly appeared. Then, more and more silver and gold Tianlei surged out from below. Those were all Tianlei power buried in the reefs in the deepest part of the lightning pool. Rise! Shijing raised his hammer high. Countless Tianlei gathered and soared into the sky. Like a surging river, it cut through the sky and went straight for Chu Luiyue. She took a step forward and looked at the towering illusory god palace. She smiled, but her voice was extremely cold. Is this lightning pool yours? Chapter 2477. There was no question more powerful than this, because the scenes that had occurred before their eyes were all facts. Only then did Shijing turn around and look at the Pantheon record. There was already a bright light shining on it, revealing his name. He was also the real fourth divine envoy. Herb Mountain, Star Road, Lightning Pool. 3 questions were a declaration of sovereignty. No one answered. However, everyone present had already made a choice in their hearts. Even Fan Yunxiao and the others in the main hall could not help but change their expressions as they looked at the blurry figure. How should they deal with the current situation? The golden and silver Tianlei were like the Milky Way falling from the 9 heavens. Countless rays of light rushed toward Chu Luiyue in a rush. It was as if they had finally met again after a long time in space, bringing with them endless longing and affection. When they came, they were clearly aggressive, but when they were in front of her, they became careful and gentle. Chu Luiyue looked down and chuckled softly. No wonder the Tianlei were so close to her when she dived into the depths of the lightning pool last time, and even secretly helped her. This was hers in the first place. Even though they had not seen her for too long, they could still recognize her. A few golden Tianlei seemed to be bolder as they touched her hands and arms lightly. Some even circled around her waist and circled back and forth. She smiled. Don't hit your waist this time. The Tianlei around her waist reluctantly moved away. However, probably because of their reluctance, they still circled around her body. From afar, she seemed to be enveloped in the lightning. The next moment, a black shield appeared in her hand. It was black and heavy, with mysterious patterns engraved on it. Chu Luiyue looked down and scanned the top of it carefully. Then, as if they were summoned, the Tianlei rushed into it crazily. Crackle! An intense and ear-piercing sound of refining was heard. Seeing this, many people were suddenly stunned. What was she planning to do? That black shield seemed to be a divine artifact to begin with. Sacred primal chaos jade. Suddenly, an exclamation came from the crowd outside the gate. Isn't that the missing piece of the holy primal chaos jade? In fact, not many people knew about this matter. Thus, many people were shocked when they saw this scene. Aunt Eleven's eyes suddenly lit up. 12th Nyang was also quite anxious. She stood on her tiptoes to take a look. As she read, she couldn't help but touch her forehead. Sister, where's mine? Where's mine? 4th brother and the others all had bloodline totems, so they should have them too, right? Aunt Eleven suddenly grabbed her hand and ran forward. Sigh, Lu Feng shouted. Just as she was about to give chase, she suddenly felt a formless energy brushing past her. He was stunned for a moment, then raised his hand to grab it. In the void, an inch-long stream of light with an extremely faint green color fell into his palm. In the blink of an eye, he suddenly realized something and turned to look in a certain direction. Big Brother's barrier had already reached here? In this short pause, Aunt 11 and Aunt 12 had already run to the gate of the palace of the illusory god. Ruan Jianfeng was originally looking at the situation inside in shock. When he heard the movement, he immediately turned back. When he saw the 2 women rushing over again, he frowned. A hint of impatience and viciousness flashed across his face. If Chu Luiyue was problematic, then her subordinates must be the same too. I must solve this as soon as possible. Thinking of this, Ruan Jianfeng attacked without hesitation. He threw out a stream of divine power. However, before the divine power touched the 2, it suddenly stopped. A ball of reddish-gold flame flew over and burned it to ashes. More importantly, after it blocked the attack, it didn't leave. Instead, it came straight for Yuan Jianfeng. Yuan Jianfeng was caught off guard. His hand was instantly burned black. He took a few steps back in shock. Why did the fire of the reddish-gold celestial phoenix seem to be stronger than before? He was an existence above the level of a god. Logically speaking, he shouldn't be so easily burned by the fire. However, before he could think clearly about this problem, he suddenly heard that noble and indifferent voice sound out once again. Do you think you can offend the 11th and 12th gods' emissaries? As the voice fell, 2 balls of sparks ignited on the Pantheon record. Then, the names of the 2 ladies appeared together. Ant 11 and Ant 12 were shrouded by the brilliant light between their eyebrows at the same time. In the next moment, the 2 had already passed Yuan Jianfeng and went straight for the Holy Chaos Jade. Master! The 2 of them had a tacit understanding. In an instant, they separated on both sides of the Holy Chaos Jade and looked at the figure in front with bright eyes. Chu Luiyue flicked her wrist. The armillary sky shield instantly flew out and hung above the Holy Chaos Jade. Then, a scroll appeared in her hand. It was the flowing clouds flying illustration. In the next moment, she raised her arm and the flowing clouds flying illustration fell into Ant 11's hand. Merge! Yes! Ant 11 responded. With a swoosh, she unfolded the flowing clouds flying illustration. A strong and bright light quickly gushed out from it. Ant 11's hand brushed across it. A lustrous light flew out from it and merged with the armillary sky shield. Chu Luiyue threw out the great azure sun axe. Merge again. Ant 12 was nervous and excited. She grabbed the great azure sun axe tightly and twisted it gently with both hands. Another lustrous light flew out. However, it wasn't enough. Looking at the armillary sky shield that didn't fall down and merged with the Holy Chaos Jade, Chu Luiyue suddenly raised her head and looked at the distant horizon. There, the divine gate stood tall and was tightly shut. Fifth, open the door. Chapter 2478. A voice rang out. Wu Yao, who had arrived in front of the heavenly gate, immediately responded. Yes. With that, he moved and headed straight for the heavenly gate. At this moment, the 11th divine envoy, Qiu Tong, was still guarding this place. The scenes that had occurred earlier had already caused him to be completely dazed. It was only when he saw Wu Yao coming that he finally regained his senses. For some reason, he felt a sense of nervousness in his heart. How dare you? What are you trying to do? Wu Yao clasped his hands together, his knuckles cracking as he chuckled. Didn't you hear what I was trying to do? Qiu Tong's throat went dry, and his body tensed up. The heavenly gate is... Wu Yao was impatient with him talking about this and directly kicked forward. A resplendent light instantly burst out from between his brows. Immediately after, the light completely enveloped him. Without giving Qiu Tong any chance, he punched out. This punch was extremely heavy. Everywhere it passed, the void collapsed one after another. Large patches of collapsed black holes spread out, and turbulence surged. Get lost. Sensing the powerful force contained in the fist, Qiu Tong's heart skipped a beat. In an instant, he felt a strong sense of uneasiness and fear. However, if he dodged at this time, he would not be able to report back to his superiors. Therefore, he could only take it head-on. Qiu Tong quickly gathered all the divine power in his body and poured it into his right fist. At this moment, Wu Yao's fierce fist wind had already arrived in front of his face. That astonishing power seemed to want to tear his entire body apart in an instant. Qiu Tong was shocked. A quarter of an hour ago, Wu Yao was just an ordinary god. How did he become so strong in the blink of an eye? Without thinking too much, he also punched out. Bang! With a muffled sound, the 2 fists collided. In an instant, Qiu Tong felt as if he had punched an extremely hard iron wall. His entire palm instantly went numb. The powerful impact spread out with the 2 of them as the center. Qiu Tong's blood surged, and his face quickly turned red. A thick, sweet, and fishy taste surged up his throat, but he swallowed it down. However, his hand and half of his arm could no longer feel anything. This punch was simply too powerful. As if seeing through his thoughts, Wu Yao raised his eyebrows, licked his lips, and chuckled. I've been training for so many years. Do you think it's all for nothing? Seeing his expression, Chiu Tong suddenly had a bad feeling. After all, he had been in the position of the 11th oracle for many years, so he was still vigilant in the face of death. Therefore, in the next moment, he retreated without hesitation. However, Wu Yao was even faster. He opened his palm and grabbed Chiu Tong's wrist. Heh, you want to run before the fight is over? How could there be such a good thing? Chiu Tong was shocked and immediately raised her leg to counterattack. Wu Yao seemed to have expected this and kicked horizontally. Bang! Crack! The crisp sound of bones cracking could be heard. Chiu Tong's leg was at an extremely strange angle. Intense pain engulfed him. His face turned from red to white. At the same time, he finally couldn't hold it in any longer and spat out a mouthful of blood. But before he could spit out blood, Wu Yao had already used his hidden strength to twist his hand around. This time, Chiu Tong's shoulder was also dislocated. Tieske, you can't even withstand a single blow. Wu Yao looked at him with disdain. Well, at least the blood didn't splash on him. Then he simply dislocated Chiu Tong's other shoulder. Of course, he easily broke the arm together. I told you to get lost. Wu Yao snorted and threw him out. He clapped his hands and continued walking forward. He came to the front of the divine gate and raised his head slightly. No wonder he felt that there was something wrong with the gate. After that, he looked at it for so many days. Of course, he was most familiar with his own gate. He loosened his shoulders, raised his hand, and placed it on the divine gate. Then he pushed hard. Creak! The gate of heaven, which only opened once every 10,000 years, opened once again under his palm. Chu Luiwei held his breath and focused. Then, a clear shout spread far and wide. Return! This shout went with the wind, passed through the illusory god palace, passed through the star path, and rushed out of the divine gate. Then, it echoed throughout the entire divine ruins world. A gust of wind blew over the undulating mountains. The leaves rustled, and the pine trees rustled. Suddenly, the earth shook and the mountains shook. The steepest and steepest mountains seemed to have been split apart by an invisible force. A silver stream of light suddenly rushed out from the bottom of the mountain. It went straight to the gate that opened again in the sky. In a certain ancestral hall. It was silent. There were people in twos and threes leaving the ancestral hall. It seemed that they had just finished a worship. However, at this moment, a voice came from the dome. Everyone was taken aback as they raised their heads to look. That's swoosh. A piercing sound suddenly came from the ancestral hall behind everyone. Everyone turned around and saw a stream of light rushing into the sky. The treasure that had been stored away for so many years finally answered the call and returned to the place where it was first found. This voice also reached the Peach Blossom Cove at the same time. Sanson was lying on a small bed reading the account book. When he heard the voice, he was shocked and quickly got up to look outside. Then, almost without any hesitation, he rushed out of the gate. He didn't even have time to pick up the account book that fell on the ground. The servant who was guarding outside the door saw this and couldn't help but be shocked. What are you? Before he could finish his sentence, Sanson's figure was already far away. The servant looked into the room and hurriedly shouted, You didn't bring your account book. Sanson didn't even turn his head. Don't. The servant was stunned and almost doubted that he had heard it wrong. Don't want it? This was something that he, who had always regarded money as his life, and the account book was more important than anything else, could say? Seeing that Sanson was running further and further away, the servant chased after him. Where are you going? Why did it seem that he was going to leave the Peach Blossom Cove directly? The Peach Blossom Cove still needs your protection. Sanson's footsteps were hurried. Hearing this, it muttered to itself. This world belongs to my master. What is a small Peach Blossom Cove? This was the real world, and all the land belonged to the king. The servant didn't hear him clearly because Samson had already run far away. Soon, 13 caught up. "Third brother, 13, you're here too? Quick, let's go together." Samson hurriedly waved at him. 13 pursed his lips and nodded firmly. Then, the two ran in a certain direction together. Soon, they arrived at the gate of the Peach Blossom Cove. Yu-Gi-Oh was waiting here. Seeing the two of them, he was delighted. That was Master's voice. Samson rubbed his face and stepped into the gate. Back to the Illusion God Palace. Chapter 2479. A ray of light quickly arrived at the divine gate and arrived above the holy chaos jade without hesitation. Aunt 11 raised her head and glanced at it. With a wave of her hand, the item fell into her hand. It was one of the 10 great sacred artifacts. She put away the sacred artifact and summoned a ray of light that flew into the celestial shield. Aunt 12 didn't stay idle either. She fused all the sacred artifacts in Chu Yue's hands into the shield. The onlookers were shocked when they saw this scene. So, she was summoning the 10 great sacred artifacts just now? Someone murmured in the deathly silent crowd. This was too domineering. Was she going to completely fuse the power of the celestial shield and put it back into the holy chaos jade? She didn't even hesitate to open the divine gate again. While everyone was still in shock, several more streams of light flew in from outside the heaven gate. At this time, the celestial shield was already covered by rays of light. Chu Luiyue took out the heavenly square cauldron. She looked down and stared at it for a while. Then she patted it gently with her palm. This was her first sacred artifact. At that time, Zichen was still sealed in it. She suddenly thought of something and looked back at the main hall of the illusory god palace. Rong Xiu's figure was clearly visible. The two of them looked at each other. This moment was more than thousands of words. The corner of her lips curled up slightly. Then she looked at Zichen. Zichen's mind was connected with hers. Almost at the moment when she looked over, he looked up. Then he pursed his thin lips and nodded gently. Chu Liyue's smile deepened. In order to send the heavenly square cauldron to her, that person really put in a lot of effort. Back then, she had asked Zichen who sealed him in the heavenly square cauldron. But he had never given her an answer, because he couldn't remember the other party's appearance clearly. But now, she finally understood. If that person was the strongest person in the world, then sealing a three-eyed eagle, or even messing up its memories, would be a simple matter. Hidden behind the memories, which were either true or false, was his meticulous planning. Had he been preparing for this for 1,000 years, or even longer? Chu Luiyue gently exhaled. It turned out that he had been plotting against her for more than just this lifetime. At this moment, Rong Xiu suddenly raised his hand. One Feng's halberd suddenly flew out. Following this sound, a ray of light flew out and merged with the celestial globe shield. At the same time, Chu Luiyue pushed his palm forward. The heavenly square cauldron hummed. Sparkling light overflowed. At this point, all of the saint artifacts had returned. The armillary heaven's shield had been completely enveloped by the lustrous light. The patterns on it were mysterious and complicated. If one looked at it for too long, they would feel dizzy. "All of you step back," Chu Luiyue said indifferently. When Aunt 11 and Aunt 12 heard this, they immediately retreated a good distance away. At this moment, the red gold flames were still burning around the primal chaos holy jade. The armillary heaven's shield was suspended in midair. It was only an inch away from the groove below. Under the burning of the flames, it seemed to have become boiling hot. Occasionally, there would be sparks splashing down. It was like a bright firework suddenly blooming in the dark night. The two intense and extreme colors complemented each other. It was almost dazzling. Chu Luiyue took a step forward. She was standing on the primal chaos holy jade. At this moment, she moved directly to the centermost position. The armillary heaven's shield was right beside her feet. Then she stomped her foot down. Boom! The armillary heaven's shield suddenly fell. Previously in the Red Moon Desert, She thought that the other party wanted to snatch her armillary heaven's shield, so she refused to let it go no matter what. But now, she personally returned the armillary heaven's shield to the Primal Chaos Holy Jade to take back the Primal Chaos Holy Jade that originally belonged to her. In an instant, endless pressure erupted from under her feet. In the main hall, everyone was also watching this scene. The Divine Master's voice suddenly sounded. "Emperor, did you help her just now?" Rong Xiu's expression was indifferent. The 10,000 Peaks halberd was originally refined with the power of the Primal Chaos Holy Jade. Now that the Armillary Heaven's shield has returned, this thing should be returned as well. The Divine Master suddenly laughed. That being said, the Primal Chaos Holy Jade was originally intact. But back then, this Primal Chaos Holy Jade was originally in perfect condition. If the Emperor hadn't sent Tang Ku to act, the Armillary Heaven shield wouldn't have been separated. Hearing this, everyone was shocked. Even Su Li couldn't hide her shock as she looked at Tang Ku. Tang Ku rubbed his nose. In fact, the Emperor personally obtained the Armillary Heaven's shield by splitting the Primal Chaos Holy Jade. It had nothing to do with him. He just went down to receive it. The Peach Blossom Dock was the location that the Emperor had chosen long ago. Tang Ke had long known that the Armillary Heaven's shield would land there. So when Su Li challenged him to a battle, he chose the Peach Blossom Dock. In the end, the Armillary Heaven's shield's power was too shocking. In the end, he and Su Li both died. Fortunately, he managed to save his soul and his life. Hearing this, Rong Xiu's thin scarlet lips suddenly curled into an extremely cold smile. If the Armillary Heaven's shield hadn't been broken back then and reduced the power of the Primal Chaos Holy Jade, would the divine fire have burned until today? Hearing this, the Divine Master finally stopped talking. In fact, they all knew very well whether this matter was due to selfishness or other reasons. However, everyone was just taking what they wanted, so they all remained silent. It was meaningless to talk about this now. Rong Xiu looked forward, and a dim light vaguely flashed across his eyes. At this moment, the Armillary Heaven's shield had completely merged with the Primal Chaos Holy Jade. That figure was standing on top of it. She was slender and exquisite, and her skirt fluttered in the wind. Her shoulders, which were originally slightly thin, were tenacious and straight. Then, she moved her feet slightly and turned around. The surrounding flames were raging, and the scarlet golden flames were leaping like demons. Chu Luiyue looked forward and narrowed her eyes. Then, the corners of her lips curled up slightly. A dazzling golden and black longsword suddenly appeared in her palm. The longsword was raised high, and it shone brightly. Then the sword fell and the wind blew. A cluster of divine fire burned on the white jade pillar. Different from before, this flame was rich and bright with a scarlet golden color. In the next moment, the terrifying sword energy carried the power of thousands of thunderbolts and raging flames and swept over. Boom! That clear and dignified voice echoed in the entire illusory god palace. "It's time to pay back what you owe me." Chapter 2480. The sword descended like a thunderbolt. Raging flames and gales surged along with the sword aura, heading straight for the main hall of the illusory god palace. A neat sword mark instantly appeared on the ground. In an instant, rocks flew everywhere, and smoke and dust rose. Mu Qinghe's expression changed slightly. She flew up and stabbed her sword into the ground. Boom! The two forces collided fiercely, and violent shockwaves surged in all directions. Mu Qinghe's body shook, and she knelt on the ground with one leg. She barely supported her body with the help of the sword and spat out a mouthful of blood. The dark red blood splattered on the back of her hand and the hilt of the sword, and a rich, sweet and fishy smell spread out. Seeing this scene, everyone was dumbfounded. As the strongest among the gods' envoys, the first god's envoy, Mu Qinghe, was actually unable to completely withstand Chu Luiyue's attack. Her current strength was clearly above that of her eminence. Yu Qian was standing not far from Mu Qinghe. Seeing this, his heart jumped a few times, and his entire body tensed up. If this sword landed on him, he would probably be in a worse state than Mu Qinghe. He suddenly thought of something and raised his head to look at the Pantheon record. Then he was stunned. Her name wasn't on it? The Pantheon record shone brightly. Other than Xiao Ran and the rest, the names of Qi Han and the rest had all appeared. But her name wasn't on it. How was this possible? Yu Qian stared at the Pantheon record in disbelief for a long time. There really wasn't any trace of Chu Luiwei on it. At this moment, a low and hoarse voice sounded from the main hall. Shengguan Yu has rebelled against his superiors and has evil intentions. Everyone in the illusory God Palace has the right to kill him. Listen to my orders, God's envoys. Cut off his wings and kill him. This order was obviously passed down to Mu Qinghe and the rest. Yes. Everyone received the order and rushed out of the main hall in the next moment. Several battlefields instantly appeared in the heavens above. Although the previous scene made them suspicious and uneasy, they had no choice but to obey the orders of the God Master. After Yu Qian received the order, he rushed towards God Beast Mountain without hesitation. This was the illusory God Palace, their territory. Even if Chu Luiwei and the others had some strength, it was impossible for them to win in this place. Not to mention other things, just those divine beasts alone were enough to make it difficult for them to deal with. As Yu Qian was thinking, he suddenly paused. He looked at the God Beast Mountain not far in front of him and frowned. At the top of the mountain, a tall man stood with his hands behind his back. Hua Shuangshuang. Yu Qian had interacted with Hua Shuangshuang before, so he didn't like her. Unexpectedly, he had been waiting here for a long time. Seeing him, Hua Shuangshuang laughed loudly. I've been waiting for you for a long time. Yu Qian smirked coldly. What? Are you waiting to snatch mythological Beast Mountain? Hua Shuangshuang raised her eyebrows. This was originally my master's. Now, I'm merely taking it back. How is this snatching? Yu Qian's heart beat wildly. In fact, they had already guessed Chu Luiwei's identity. Now, Hua Shuangshuang's words confirmed their guess. This battle was unavoidable. Yu Qian shouted in a deep voice. All divine beasts, listen to my order. Kill Hua Shuangshuang immediately. At his order, all the divine beasts on God Beast Mountain quickly gathered at the top of the mountain. At this time, the sky was gloomy, and the forest was lush with trees. One could only vaguely see shadows. Ferocious auras quickly approached. However, Hua Shuangshuang didn't seem to be nervous. She stood in place calmly. That small wind-stepping tiger was lying on her back. It stared at Yu Qian nervously and fiercely. It let out a threatening whimper from its throat. On one of Hua Shuangshuang's arms was the golden-winged crow-bone beast. Perhaps because of the huge commotion, the entire God Beast Mountain began to tremble violently. A golden cloud leopard was the first to appear at the top of the mountain. Yu Qian looked down at Hua Shuangshuang with a cold smile. He was waiting for those divine beasts to tear Hua Shuangshuang to shreds. However, the next moment, the scene in front of him stunned him. That golden cloud leopard didn't bite Hua Shuangshuang. Instead, it came to his feet and obediently bowed its head. Yu Qian's pupils shrank. A strong sense of uneasiness welled up in his heart. Following that, more and more divine beasts appeared. Their behavior was exactly the same as that of the golden cloud leopard. Yu Qian was about to speak when he saw Hua Shuangshuang raise her chin. Today, those who have grievances will take revenge. As soon as he finished speaking, all the divine beasts let out a roar and charged towards Yu Qian with extreme speed. The golden-winged crow-bone beast also flapped its wings and flew toward Yu Qian. Yu Qian was both shocked and furious. How dare you? This sentence was usually quite effective, but at this moment, it didn't seem to exist in the ears of the divine beasts. There were more than 100 divine beasts here, and they all pounced on Yu Qian. In the blink of an eye, they had completely surrounded him. Hua Shuangshuang patted the head of the little wind-strider tiger on her shoulder and smiled. All right, you don't have to join in the fun. It's the same for you to watch them take revenge for you. Only then did the little wind-strider tiger obediently lay back down. However, its eyes were still fixed on that side, afraid to miss any excitement. As the second envoy, Yu Qian's strength was unquestionable. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been sent to watch over Divine Beast Mountain. It was a pity that he didn't care about these divine beasts in the past. Beating, scolding, and killing them all depended on his mood. The divine beasts had accumulated resentment toward him for a long time. Today, they could finally take revenge. Naturally, they wouldn't hold back. If there were only 1 or 2 of them, they wouldn't be Yu Qian's match. But now, there were more than 100 divine beasts attacking him without regard for their lives. How could he deal with them? Yu Qian's figure was surrounded and covered, so it was hard to see him. However, the smell of blood was getting thicker and thicker. Hua Shuangshuang looked up at the Pantheon record. His name was on the list. You're just a dove occupying a magpie's nest. Do you really think it's yours after robbing someone else? He sneered softly. Fierce battles were taking place all over the illusory god palace. At this moment, Sanson finally brought them to the heavenly gate. He saw Wu Yao guarding the heavenly gate and hurriedly ran over. Hey, 5th brother. We're not late, right? Wu Yao laughed out loud and walked over. He picked Qiu Tong up and tossed her aside. You're not late. 3rd brother, accept this greeting gift. Sanson didn't even think about it and immediately dodged. But Qiu Tong fell heavily to the ground. He was already heavily injured. Now that he was being tossed around like this, there wasn't a single spot on his body that wasn't injured. He even felt that his broken bones had pierced into his flesh. The pain was so painful that he almost fainted. Sanson glanced at him with disdain. You've already dealt with it. Why are you giving it to me? Are you looking down on your 3rd brother? Shi Fang glanced at him and said faintly, 3rd brother, you just don't want to fight and dirty your hands, right? Chapter 2481. Sanson coughed. Shi Fang, if you have the time, you should go to Herb Mountain and see if you can help little Hachi. Shi Fang sighed. Herb Mountain stretches for hundreds of miles, but Sister 8 only gave me 1 mountain to grow vegetables. What else can I help her with? Sanson glared at him. That's your Sister 8. Hurry up and go. Shi Fang understood tacitly and immediately slipped away. Yu Jiu looked around. Where's Big Brother? This sword can't be used anymore. I have to find him to change it. Wu Yao pointed in a certain direction. He should be over there, right? Yu Jiu left in a hurry. Sanson patted little 13's shoulder. Let's go. Go with 3rd brother to collect the debt. After saying that, he pulled Yu Jiu away, not forgetting to remind him. 5th brother, you can deal with that person yourself. Hearing this, Qiu Tong, who was originally dizzy and almost fainted, was immediately jolted awake. He looked up and met Wu Yao's gaze. Wu Yao moved his wrist. What did your master say just now? He wants to kill us? He asked slowly. A hint of fear flashed across Qiu Tong's eyes. Wu Yao's combat strength was far above his. He really had no strength to refute now. In that case, then, I won't be polite. Wu Yao chuckled. Since master wants you to return it, then spit it all out without leaving anything behind. As he spoke, he grabbed Qiu Tong by the collar and punched him in the forehead. Bang! In an instant, flesh and blood splattered. Qiu Tong's physical body was destroyed by Wu Yao's punch just like that. A black mist quickly condensed. It was Qiu Tong's soul. Wu Yao didn't even blink. He stepped forward and crushed it with his bare hands. In an instant, a strong wind blew. On the Pantheon record, Qiu Tong's name quickly dimmed and finally disappeared silently. Many people saw this scene. The 11th divine envoy has fallen. It seems to be that Wu Yao who did it? It's him. Weren't the 11 oracles responsible for guarding the gate of heaven? Wu Yao went over and forced the door open. He must be the one who killed him. You're still calling me the 11th oracle? Wasn't it obvious who the oracle was? Someone refuted. Everyone fell silent for a moment. That's right. If Qiu Tong and the others were really divine envoys, then why would they be defeated by Wu Yao and the others? Xu Jing, Mu Dongyu, Yun Lai. Not a single one of these people did not successively lose in this battle. Or perhaps, these things didn't belong to them in the first place. And the oracle was not the most important thing. Most importantly, the one in the palace of the illusory god. Herb Mountain. Little Hachi looked up and blinked her beautiful eyes. Her red lips curled up. Seriously? I actually let fifth brother beat me to it? She was the first to be called master. In the end, she was so focused on watching the show that she forgot to take care of him first. Thinking of this, she turned to look at Shu Jing. At this time, Shu Jing was on the verge of death. He almost didn't even have the strength to speak. Sensing little Hachi's gaze, his body stiffened, and a deep sense of fear surged in his eyes. I wanted to let you watch for a while longer, but it seems that there's no need for that now. Little Hachi shrugged. Since Master has already started to make a move, then I'll pay him back little by little. Then, little Hachi waved her hand, and a ball of flame instantly flew out of her palm. In the next moment, Shu Jing's body was instantly wrapped in blazing flames. A few vague groans of pain were heard, and then gradually quieted down. At the same time, Shu Jing's name disappeared from the Pantheon record. Chu Luiwe looked forward. Mu Qinghe was half kneeling in front of the main hall. Her long sword was stabbed into the ground. Her face was pale, and the corners of her lips were stained with dark red blood. He looked like he was in a sorry state. She just stared at him, her eyes calm. After a moment, she said in a calm voice, Mu Qinghe, the last time you knelt before me was in Tianling. Mu Qinghe's hand that was holding the sword suddenly tightened, and the blood in his chest surged. Then, he said with difficulty, I'll fight for the Divine Master until my death. Chu Luiwe smiled softly. Of course, he wasn't calling her Divine Lord, but his true master. You're right. She seemed to agree with him and nodded. I misunderstood you earlier. The person you followed was never me. How can you talk about betrayal? Mu Qinghe didn't say anything. Many people were stunned when they heard these words. Mu Qinghe seemed to be related to her? Shengguan Jing and the others who knew the inside story had complicated expressions. At this point, there was nothing they didn't understand. From the beginning, Mu Qinghe was a member of the palace of the illusory god. Chu Luiwe narrowed her eyes as if she was recalling something. Then, the corners of her lips curled up. Actually, it wasn't a coincidence that you appeared on the streets of the Tianling imperial capital that day, right? Mu Qinghe looked down and stared at the ground in front of him. A ball of blood was gradually staining the ground. A bone-chilling coldness came from all directions and enveloped him. However, since you came for the zither score, why did you go through so much trouble? You even had to pretend that you didn't know how to read and follow me to learn bit by bit. That wasn't all. Chu Luiwe thought quietly. At the beginning, he didn't even know how to hold a brush. His clumsiness and nervousness were clearly visible. She patiently taught him several times. When she saw him finally writing the word, you, crookedly, she was even happy for a long time. Now that she thought about it, it was just a show that he had painstakingly acted out. Actually, you didn't have to pretend to be so clumsy back then. Chu Luiwe smiled faintly. Don't you find it annoying to have to be taught several times for something that you already know? Mu Qinghe closed her eyes. Her knuckles were white from exerting too much force. After a long time, she opened her eyes and said word by word, It's already in the past. There's no need to mention it now. Chu Luiwe tilted his head. Divine power surged on the star darkness sword. Yes, it's already in the past. There's no need to mention it again. However, I really wasted a lot of time and energy on you back then. Now that I think about it, I can't help but feel that it's a pity. I'll get back what your master owes me later. Now you'll have to pay back what you owe me first. With that, she raised her sword again. At this moment, the second flame on the white jade pillar had already ignited wildly. The power of her sword was clearly stronger than before. The firelight reflected in her eyes was dazzling and resplendent. The sword fell. The sword aura surged forward. Mu Qinghe raised his sword to block. The sword in his hand shattered in an instant. Then, his body fell back uncontrollably. Immediately after, the sword aura suddenly changed direction and pierced through his right leg. A bloody hole the size of a bowl appeared in an instant. White bones could be seen inside. This sword is what you owe Dumpling. Chapter 2482. Bang. Mu Qinghe's knee landed heavily on the ground. Chu Luwei didn't hesitate and sent out a second sword. Another sword chi arrived in an instant. This time, it was his right leg that was cut off. He knelt there, barely supporting his body with his hands. Blood kept flowing out from his body, and soon it was dark red. First messenger. Seeing this, Sangbai was shocked. In their impression, Mu Qinghe had always been extremely powerful. Even the second messenger, Yu Qian, who had been in charge of the illusory god palace for many years, didn't dare to overstep the rules in front of him. When Mu Qinghe asked him to kneel for 3 days and 3 nights, he did as he was told and didn't dare to say a word of no. Who would have thought that Chu Luwei would directly suppress him when she made a move? He didn't even have the strength to retaliate. Sangbai was anxious. Without any hesitation, she rushed over. However, at this moment, a voice came from not far away. 13. Stop him. Swoosh. Before Sangbai could react, he realized that there was someone in front of him. He hurriedly looked over and saw that the person in front of him was a teenager who looked no more than 16 or 17 years old. He had a delicate appearance and a tall figure. However, the aura around him was so strong that it couldn't be ignored. Sangbai suddenly realized something and looked up at the Pantheon record. On it, a name gradually appeared, 13. This teenager was, Master wants to settle the score with Mu Qinghe now. How can anyone else interfere? Sanson wobbled over, glanced at Sangbai from head to toe, and snorted. You don't have the qualifications to make my master take action. 13. He stole your position. Just get rid of him. 13 nodded and attacked without hesitation. At this moment, the power of the bloodline in their bodies had been awakened, so it wasn't a problem for them to deal with Sangbai. Since it concerned his master, 13's actions were especially swift and decisive. Sangbai had no choice but to fight back. However, how could he be 13's opponent? 13's fists were fast, and his movements were fast. He didn't give Sangbai any chance to counterattack. In a short while, he was already at a disadvantage. At this moment, a shriek suddenly came from the divine beast mountain. Roar! With that, the other divine beasts also raised their heads and roared. Accompanied by these cries, the Yu Qian name on the Pantheon record instantly vanished. The second oracle, Yu Qian, had fallen. Sanson raised his head to take a look and clicked his tongue. Then he said to 13 beside him, Little 13, you deal with it yourself. Third brother, I'm going over first. Second brother has already finished, but I haven't moved yet. 13 responded and continued to fight with Sangbai. Sang's 3 walked forward for a while and saw a person walking out of the main hall. He narrowed his eyes and took a look. As if sensing his gaze, that person also looked over. The two of them looked at each other. It's you, right? Sanson asked. Fan Yunxiao frowned. At this moment, Yen Gu suddenly walked out from the main hall. When he saw Sanson, he immediately said, That's right. It's him. Sanson snorted. That's why I said it. It smells like copper. Yen Ji's mouth twitched. What right do you have to talk about others like that? However, seeing that Sanson was about to make a move, he tactfully swallowed his words. He cleared his throat. Remember to come to my place after the fight and take that account book away. If the Emperor hadn't asked him to take care of this matter, he wouldn't be willing to look at such a thick account book every day. He was tired of looking at it. Sanson's eyes immediately lit up as he rubbed his hands eagerly. Come on. Let me see how capable a person who has been in the position of the third oracle for so long is. Yu Jiao followed the direction Wu Yao pointed and arrived at the courtyard. Big brother. He followed his senses and pushed open the door of one of the rooms. Xin Yi was indeed inside. Yu Jiao was delighted. Big brother, Psst. As he spoke, he glanced around and saw a sand table in front of Xin Yi. He widened his eyes slightly as shock flashed across his face. This is the sand table of the illusion god palace? This sand table was accurately replicated according to a certain ratio. The mountains, rivers, houses, and plants were all identical to the illusion god palace. At this moment, streaks of green light gracefully covered the entire sand table. Sun-yi looked up. "What's the matter? Yu-Jio." "Big brother, at this time, you still want me to use this small wooden sword. Isn't it inappropriate?" As he spoke, he waved the wooden sword in his hand. Sun-yi nodded. "That's true. It's time to change to something more convenient." Yu-Jio was delighted, but before he could speak, Sun-yi continued. "It's just that your sword isn't with me." Yu-Jio was stunned. "Where is it?" Sun-yi's expression was calm. "The illusion god see." Yu-Jio's face stiffened. "Big brother, you are joking, right? The illusion god see is so big. How troublesome would it be to find a sword?" Sun-yi had already looked at the sand table again. "Before I seal the illusion god see, you'd better hurry." The corner of Yu-Jio's mouth twitched. Big brother was clearly in charge of the illusion god see, so he definitely knew where his sword was. Why did he have to make him make this trip? Sun-yi didn't look up. "I don't have time." Yu-Jio. Seeing that Sun-yi had continued, Yu-Jio gritted his teeth and no longer hesitated. He turned around and headed towards the illusion god see. At this moment, someone rushed out of the illusion god see and arrived in front of the heavenly gate. It was Biling. Chapter 2483. She had been waiting in the depths of the illusionary god ocean and came out when she sensed that something was wrong. When he saw it, he was dumbfounded. The heavenly gate was open again. And the person guarding the gate was no longer Chiu Tong, but another man. Biling's eyes quickly scanned Wu Yao, and she was even more shocked. This person was extremely strong. "Who are you? How dare you be so presumptuous in front of the heavenly gate?" she shouted angrily with a cold face. Wu Yao crossed his arms and leaned against the heavenly gate. He had already sensed it when Biling came up, so he wasn't surprised. Hearing that, he just raised his eyes lazily and smiled. "Heh, I was wondering why there was one person missing. But it's not bad to send yourself to me." Biling was even angrier. At this moment, a loud sound suddenly came from the illusionary god palace. Boom! She looked up subconsciously, and her pupils shrank. When did the divine fire of the illusionary god palace go out? Under the dark sky, several bolts of silver heavenly lightning shot up from the lightning pool and crazily bombarded a certain direction. The loud sound just now came from there. She was shocked and didn't know what to say. The scene in front of her was far beyond her imagination. She had only been away for a while. How could Wu Yao also looked over, touched his chin, and explained kindly, "Hey, your fourth divine emissary seems to be on the verge of dying." At this moment, a black hammer suddenly smashed down on the ball of light. Wu Yao clicked his tongue. Fourth brother still has a bad temper. Then, Biling saw with her own eyes that Mu Dongyo's name on the brilliant pantheon record quickly dimmed and disappeared. This hammer had indeed directly taken his life. She was horrified, and a chill instantly spread to her limbs and bones. Then, almost without hesitation, she turned around and tried to escape. The illusionary god palace was extremely dangerous now. Wu Yao snorted and immediately waved out a barrier to intercept it. "You're dreaming if you want to leave at this time." At this moment, Yu-Jio hurried over. Wu Yao asked, "Ninth brother, where are you going?" Yu-Jio explained helplessly. "Big brother asked me to go to the illusionary god see to get the sword." As he spoke, he glanced over. "Oh, fifth brother, are you going to kill both of us?" Wu Yao wanted to leave her for the others, but when he heard this, he was immediately amused. That makes sense. There were a total of 13 people. Apart from Mu Qinghe and Mo Shiqian, who was already dead, there was less than one of them each. Such a great opportunity indeed could not be missed. Biling was shocked. Kill both of them? Could it be? Before she could think clearly, Wu Yao had already immediately. An extremely loud sound of something breaking through the air could be heard. However, in the next moment, The whip was suddenly sliced apart by a piercingly cold strand of sword chi. It was Yu Jiao who had thrown the broken wooden sword over. "Ninth brother, I'll take half of this head when we return." With that, he disappeared outside the divine gate. Wu Yao couldn't help but laugh. "Stinking brat, you sure are calculating." Loses. Almost at the same time, two names fell on the Pantheon record. Sang Bai Ling. For well weighed the hammer in his hand. "Oh, 13th brother, you've become much stronger. You're even faster than third brother." But Wu Yao is really cunning. He took down two of them just because he was guarding the heavenly gate. He stretched his shoulders. If he didn't have to guard the thunder pool, he might be the one to kill both of them. At this moment, Jin Yunlai's situation wasn't any better. His path had already been blocked by 7 coldness. The two of them were in a stalemate. Chi Han stared at him, his voice cold. "I wanted to go to the star path and give you a quick death, but now it seems that there's no need. It doesn't matter how you die. It's not good to dirty the star path." These words were the greatest humiliation to Jin Yunlai. He gritted his teeth. "Do you think you can decide my life and death at will just because you control the star path? Don't forget, I was in charge of the star path for 10,000 years. How did you finish the star path? Do you need me to tell you?" Chi Han interrupted him bluntly. "If it weren't for your master's help, you would still be trapped outside the illusory god palace." Jin Yunlai's face turned pale. That was right. This was the deepest secret in his heart. After the war, the 13 divine envoys died. The divine master wanted to choose a new divine envoy, but no one passed the star path. In the end, the divine master chose him. With his help, he was able to finish the star path and become the 7th divine envoy. Everyone thought that he had relied on his own strength to reach where he was today. But in reality, he knew very well that this was not the case. He just didn't expect Chi Han to see through him. "You're not the only one who used the same method to occupy the position of divine envoy." Chi Han's expression was cold. Although it was a question, his tone was very certain. Jin Yunlai's body trembled slightly. Swoosh! Chi Han attacked, and multiple Xian formations flew out at the same time, completely surrounding Jin Yunlai in the middle and killing him in a frenzy. "If you don't have the ability, don't stay in that position." As Chi Han finished speaking, Jin Yunlai's name disappeared from the Pantheon record. Not long after, Ruan Jianfeng was defeated by Lu Feng. Almost at the same time, 13 killed Shi Yan. He became the second person after Wu Yao to complete a double kill. Chi Han followed closely behind and killed Jiolong as well. Now, Sanson was the last one. When he finally stepped on Fan Yunxiao's head, he looked up and was instantly disheartened. Why are they all so fast? They didn't give him any face at all. 13 came to his side. "Third brother, big brother told you to cultivate more." Sanson touched his nose. "Cough, this isn't what your third brother is good at. Everyone has their own strengths, right?" As he spoke, he looked at Yengu. "Where's the stuff?" Yengu flicked his wrist, and an account book flew to Sanson. Sanson caught the item with one hand. He couldn't help but touch the cover. "It's really the same as before," 13 suddenly whispered. "Third brother, do you think Master will kill Mu Qinghe?" Actually, this was the question in many people's minds. Countless pairs of eyes looked over. At this moment, Mu Qinghe's legs were crippled. She knelt on the ground with blood all over her body. Chu Luiwei stood quietly with a sword in one hand. Suddenly, she turned her gaze and looked to the side. Hong Yao was lying on Dumpling's chest. It seemed to have cried until there were no more tears left. Sensing Chu Luiwei's gaze, it raised its head and looked over with a sorrowful gaze. Swish! Chu Luiwei slashed with her sword. The sharp sword Qi nailed Mu Qinghe's right hand to the ground. "This sword is to pay you back for what you did back then," she said coldly. "You don't have the right to write my name." Mu Qinghe knelt on the ground with her head lowered. Her fingers were slightly curled. "Just watch," Chu Luiwei murmured softly. The next moment, she lifted her foot and headed toward the main hall of the illusory god palace. Digression, It's so stuck. 630 is even worse. Chapter 2484. At this point, only Muchingha was still alive among the 13 god envoys of the Illusion God Palace. However, he was already covered in wounds, and he was on the verge of death. He was only a hair's breadth away from death. Chu Luiwei held her sword and walked toward the main hall step by step. The ground around her was stained with blood, and it was a complete mess. As she slowly walked forward, clusters of flames began to burn on the white jade pillar behind her. That was the true power of a god master. As the flames leaped, Chu Luiwei's aura surged crazily again. Sensing the terrifying pressure that was gradually emitted from her body, the crowd outside the door gradually felt their chests tighten, and they found it difficult to breathe. They all retreated. Looking at the slender figure slowly walking out of the flames, countless people were filled with horror. Wasn't she already strong enough? Even Muchingha couldn't take more than 3 moves from her. Why was she still getting stronger? Where was her limit? Zichen was originally looking at Chu Luiwei. Suddenly, he felt that the little person in his arms was a little strange, so he looked down. What he saw caused him to be stunned. Dumpling's body seemed to be gradually warming up. Even the greenish-black death chi between her eyebrows seemed to have dissipated a lot compared to before. He subconsciously reached out and touched her little face. It was indeed warm. Zichen's heart suddenly beat faster. He suddenly thought of something and his expression changed. Could it be? He suddenly raised his head. On the chaos holy jade, the reddish-gold flame was still burning fiercely. It even seemed to be hotter than before. At this time, 5 flames had lit up on the white jade pillar. The wounds on Dumpling's body began to heal rapidly. Hong Yao also noticed something. It stared at Dumpling's little face, not daring to move. Then the 6th, 7th, and 8th flames appeared. Chu Luiwei walked past Muchingha. She was surrounded by a strong murderous and bloody aura. Muchingha's body moved a little, as if she wanted to get up. She raised her head to take a look. But in the end he stopped all his actions. More and more blood spread out beneath his body. When the 9th flame burned, Dumpling's face finally flushed red. The bones and flesh on her 2 small feet regrew and reconnected. Chu Luiwei came to the front of the steps. Then she lifted her leg and stepped onto the steps. The 10th flame was ignited. The moment her feet stepped on the stairs, the 3 water droplets in her dantian started to fluctuate again. This time, it was more intense than any of the previous times. Chu Luiwei continued to climb upwards. When the 11th flame was ignited, a water droplet suddenly collided with another water droplet and fused together. She ascended the 9 steps. When he stepped onto the last level, the 12th flame appeared. The 3rd water droplet also merged. The round and beautiful water droplet quietly floated in her dantian. The vast and shocking power continued to surge. Chu Luiwei stood firmly and finally arrived in front of the main hall of the Illusory God Palace. At this time, Dumpling's injuries had mostly healed. Between her eyebrows, a bright light flickered. Zichen's throat was a little dry. He slowly clenched his fists, but his gaze was fixed on her. Chu Luiwei held her breath and concentrated. Then she sighed softly. This light sigh was carried away by the wind. In an instant, it overturned the entire Illusory God Palace. The 13th flame was finally ignited. Between heaven and earth, the flames burned fiercely. At the same time, Dumpling's body suddenly surged with endless flames, completely enveloping her. Then she suddenly opened her eyes. In an instant, a pressure that seemed to come from the distant time and space covered the sky and earth. Countless divine beasts knelt on the ground, hissing in unison, declaring their absolute submission and reverence. She was reborn from the flames and opened her 9th meridian. Mao Zhen murmured in shock. Then he finally realized something. Could it be, between them, it's not a master-servant contract, but a life contract? In the next moment, Dumpling suddenly flew out from Zichen's arms. Wrapped in flames, she transformed into her true form. Like a pair of wings hanging from the clouds, it swept over with blazing wind and waves. Screech! A phoenix cry instantly resounded in the sky above the illusory god palace. Sacred and honorable. That was the absolute pressure of the divine beast of the illusory god palace. On Feng Ming Mountain, the two Tian baby also grew its ninth leaf. Whoosh! Endless energy of heaven and earth rushed toward Chu Luiyue. At this moment, that water droplet finally transformed into a transparent zither score. Clang! The sound of a zither came out from Chu Luiyue's body. Whoosh! Her posture was straight, and her sword was pointed forward. Now it's your turn. A clear and powerful voice echoed in the entire main hall. Finally, the blurry figure gradually became clear. Then, a low and hoarse voice came out. I've also been waiting for you for a long time. As soon as he finished speaking, a god domain that was a mixture of silver and crimson rushed out with a loud rumble. Chu Luiyue was shocked. That aura was exactly the same as her god realm. At this moment, an earth-shattering commotion broke out in the Divine Ruins world. Several broken black divine bodies flew out from various places and went straight to the illusory god palace. Chu Luiyue's heart was suddenly set off by stormy waves. In the door of the Peach Blossom Dock, a face gradually appeared in the mirror. She was incomparably beautiful, with cold eyes and unparalleled nobility. But those eyes were as deep as the eternal night of 10,000 years. Yueshin, welcome back. Chapter 2485. Yueshin, welcome back. These words came from the gradually clear figure in front of her. It was still a low and hoarse voice, but it sent chills down Chu Luiyue's spine. What does this mean? He had been waiting for her to return to the illusory god palace? But countless thoughts flashed through her mind. At this moment, the black divine bodies turned into flowing lights and flew in from outside the divine gate, gathering together. The silhouette gradually became clearer. That person wore a black robe and a huge hood covered his face, making it impossible to see through. But when Chu Luiyue looked at it, she felt that the figure was very familiar. It was clearly very similar to her. Looking at the intertwining silver and red divine realm around him, her heart beat even more violently. An extremely preposterous conjecture entered her mind, and she couldn't get rid of it. The battle 10,000 years ago had actually erupted very suddenly. At that time, she was the divine master, and the 2 high priests and 13 divine envoys were in charge of the illusory god palace. Everything was normal. Suddenly, one day, someone killed his way into the illusory god palace. Without any warning, he suddenly appeared just like that. That person's attire was the same as today. He was covered up tightly. Even though she had fought with him for a long time, she still couldn't see his face. He seemed to have prepared for a long time and knew all of her vital points and moves like the back of his hand. What was even more shocking was that at that time, a considerable portion of the illusory god palace had already submitted to him. It was just that this was done very discreetly, so she hadn't noticed. In the end, a fierce battle forced Yi Ling to self-immolate and burn half of the illusory god palace. But that wasn't the end. In order to protect the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan, she hid a trace of Yi Ling's aura in a golden feather and sent it down to the Divine Ruins world to hide in the Phoenix Temple. And she herself led many supreme gods to fight with him in the god-slaying tomb. That battle was extremely fierce and many gods fell, including herself. In her memory, the other party's divine body was also cut apart at the last moment. And that was because Diwu Zhangzi suddenly betrayed them. This was also why he hated Diwu Zhangzi to this day and imprisoned him in the illusory god ocean to be tortured. But she didn't know what happened after that. Including their divine bodies being suppressed in different parts of the Divine Ruins world, Dugu Mabao and the other 2 being trapped in the Red Moon Desert, the other party seizing the illusory god palace, choosing 13 divine envoys, and reversing right and wrong. Actually, she didn't understand anything. Most importantly, during the battle back then, his opponent had not unleashed his deity domain at all. That was why she was so shocked when she sensed the aura of a god domain that was almost exactly the same. And now, this figure, the identity of the other party was almost obvious. At this moment, the voice seemed to contain a smile as it floated into his ears. Yueshin, since you and I were born in this world, we should be on equal footing. What's the difference between you and me sitting on the seat of the Divine Master? Chu Yuyue's pupils shrank. Born in the same world. What did that mean? Well, the sound of something shattering suddenly rang out. Dugu Mabao, who had been silent for a long time and didn't give any response, suddenly tore open the space, broke the mirror, and stepped out. With the zither music score fused and Yueshin returned, as the high priest, his strength naturally rose as well. You're just an evil spirit transformed from a shadow. How can you be compared to Yueshin? Dugu Mabao's cold and majestic voice exploded in everyone's hearts like a clap of thunder. The current Divine Master of the illusory God Palace was her shadow. Then, everyone was stunned. Ever since the divine fire of the chaotic holy jade was extinguished, they had already realized that there was something wrong with this Divine Master. And after Chu Liyue's continuous questioning and easily taking back the Star Road's Herb Mountain and Lightning Pool, everyone was even more certain of this conjecture. At this point, everyone could see that Chu Liyue was the true Divine Master. It was only because of the turmoil 10,000 years ago that this person had seized everything. But no matter how much they thought about it, they never expected that this was an evil spirit transformed from her shadow. Actually, even the 13 divine envoys didn't know about this, because they had fallen together with Chu Liyue back then. So, only Dugu Mabao and the other two knew about this. No, there was one more person. Chu Liyue suddenly turned around and looked at Rong Xiu. Ripples seemed to be surging in the depths of his cold and deep eyes. But his expression was still calm. Obviously, he had known about this for a long time. Then, the sound of something shattering rang out again. Lan Xiao walked out of the mirror and stretched with a faint smile on his face. The high priest is right. Who do you think you are to be on the same level as Yueshin? Why don't you take a good look at yourself? No matter what, you have been the Divine Master for more than 10,000 years. But after such a long time, you can't even ignite the divine fire and have to rely on the power of the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan to barely maintain it. Don't you feel ashamed? He snorted and looked up slightly at Mu Qinghe, who was kneeling on the ground outside the door. In addition, the people you've chosen are too lacking in standards. We didn't even have to do anything, and the 13 divine envoys have already taken care of them. You still want to be the Divine Master? Are you worthy? These words were indeed heart-wrenching. But when the evil spirit heard it, it didn't seem to care much. It only said to Chu Liyue, Yueshin, if you want to take back the palace of the illusory god, fight with me. The winner is the king, and the loser is the bandit. One battle will determine life and death. Do you agree or not? That you're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.